And at the beginning of it all, we read a completely destroyed city, and our protagonist has a bored expression on his face, and he thinks it's boring there, as he passes through a completely destroyed street, being watched by monsters from all sides. But the creature follows the calm element's path, so he wonders why that bastard only makes things worse and keeps running away. He starts to wonder if it was near any, but looking ahead, he ends up seeing those monsters eating a guy and realizes it's the guy he was looking for, but says that what it looks like, he killed himself, and he thinks that's cool. But the monsters, seeing him, soon target the protagonist, and the system names them as monsters with numbers as their names. And the protagonist asks if they don't have anything to do about those shitty names. But then, all three of those monsters go all out towards the protagonist at an absurd speed, but the boy watches calmly, turning up, raising his dagger, which looks more like those items that you buy from the first vendor in every game you play, and ends up activating its addition and multiplication to kill those monsters, each one with a single hit, easily. And outside there is a gigantic wall with some stakes protecting the perimeter, and so he tells the people outside to open it, because he is coming back. And a guy outside, quite friendly, Zhang Yang, a hard mode player, came out of the protagonist asking if he is back yet, and he says he almost died of boredom, asking if he can't send someone else in his place when it is a situation like that. But in this, Zhang Yang says that he knows he is the only one who can do that, but asks if that bastard he went after escaped. But the protagonist says that he died and his body is already being devoured by the monsters, and Zhang Yang is surprised, noticing that that bastard was a hard mode player, asking if he has already died. And the protagonist says that there were 3 rank A monsters devouring him, and so Zhang Yang is surprised, because the hard mode players are strong, but a rank A monster can be compared to a hard mode player, so he thinks that by having 3 of them around, it makes everything very difficult, so they need to finish them off quickly. So he asks the protagonist where those monsters are, and the boy simply says that he killed them, and Zhang Yang even accepts it well. And the protagonist says he's going to eat something, but the boy tells him not to lie to him, because he's an easy mode player, and our protagonist is Kang Taesung, who actually plays on easy mode. And he asks if he ate shit, because there are a lot of people who went through the labyrinth with him, saying that Zhang Yang can ask him, but the boy says that besides him, all the other easy mode players are currently dead, and those who appear after die after today's. And the protagonist questions if he really doesn't care much about what the boy is saying, and he says it's true, asking how an easy mode player can survive there, since even normal mode players continue to suffer in that world. And he says that's why the protagonist is so strange, and wonders how he's so strong, since he's also a hard mode player, but he can't compare to the protagonist himself. And the boy finds this strange, but tells Zhang Yang that it is because they concluded that by chance. And so the boy realizes they'd saying the same thing again, and now at the camp cafeteria, he notices that he's eating sweet potatoes again, asking if there's anything new, since they only give him sweet potatoes, or if not corn. Then Zhang Yang asked what's the problem, since sweet potatoes are the best value for money, since they're simple to plant, and they have a limit to what they can give. And he remembers asking the protagonist if he hasn't learned the basic cultivation skill, but the protagonist questions if the easy mode player will really want to learn that, since no matter where they go, there's always food. So the boy agrees with him, but in that they hear an argument outside with one guy telling another that there's no way what he said is true, and he asks his friend to calm down. And the protagonist notices that it's what looks like someone who has concluded that is there, and it was a seemingly quite normal sight for them. And the protagonist says that this time he's sure he's going to be arrested after throw his little party, and then they'll explain everything to him very slowly. And so Zhang Yang thinks that it seems like that guy is a hard mode player, asking the protagonist to try to stop him, and so they send Kang there quickly because it's total chaos, and he apparently doesn't like being called for everything that the others can't solve. And that guy who is upset after returning asks how that is, even telling them to stop lying, saying that it was supposed to be over after the last return, and several people around are getting hurt because of the madman's anger, and he says that it must be a TV prank, telling him to stop it because it's not funny. And the protagonist asks where Li Taeyang is, and they say that he went on a reconnaissance mission. But then a man goes to that guy, saying that that is indeed Earth while he was trapped in a maze. The world underwent a chaotic change, telling that guy to try to calm down. But the kid completely loses his mind, telling that old man to stop it and throwing a party for help in his face. And the protagonist notices that he is really going overboard, and John won in the protagonist and will be happy. But the protagonist remembers to tell him that if he comes back, and if the potato is afraid of him, he swears that someone's funeral will be there. And the kid was all happy for the opportunity, starts to back away in fear of what might happen. And the protagonist goes to that guy, saying that unfortunately that is really Earth, and humanity is on the brink of extinction now. And the kid tells him to stop that nonsense. But the protagonist asks if that's all he knows how to say. And the kid says that there's no way that's Earth, asking if he has any idea how many players there are, asking if he really thinks they couldn't stop some little monsters from destroying everything, and he keeps telling the protagonist to stop with the joke. And the boy is already completely fed up because it's going to happen again. And he remembers with his that most of the players who leave the labyrinth and manage to return to Earth go crazy because they can't accept the current reality, so he thinks that it happens often, and this is not something easy to accept. And seeing that there will be no other way to do it, he remembers that there is only one way to solve this, and says that he will really have to get down to him beating just to see if he accepts, asking what the boy's name is, sending a battle request, and he introduces himself as Li Shangshang, asking who the protagonist is, but his name appears there, and he notices that it is Kang Tizan, saying that he is that bastard who talked a lot on the community forum, but is nothing more than an easy mode player. Then he starts laughing, saying that it is funny, an easy mode player wants to challenge a hard mode player, asking if he didn't know that the difference between players of each difficulty is like heaven and hell, all full of swagger, but that the protagonist tells him to just shut up and fight, because if he wins, he will show him the world he so wants to see. And the boy gets irritated, but accepts the protagonist's proposal, telling him not to regret it, because he doesn't care if he kills him or hits him. And so the boy starts activating the increase, and half of his basic attack will be added to the current attack, and also the focus is activated, because the attack he had an increased hit probability, and his firepower was activated, and his next attack would have a huge damage increase. Everyone was surprised, because the kid was apparently strong with that increased firepower. He went all out on the protagonist with a lightning bolt, reaching the kid's face in an instant. But even with that attack that raised a lot of dust and created crazy pyrotechnics on the battlefield, it was said that Kang Tayson completely nullified the first attack. And I know that 0 damage was done to the protagonist. The kid was surprised to see that his attack did nothing, with the protagonist holding his sword with only 2 fingers, asking if that was all. My friend, if you like B10 protagonist who simply lay it on the table and tell you to measure it without hiding their power, you're enjoying this. The guy still does those pompous poses we see in solo leveling, and the kid walks away because his attack didn't work, asking what the hell is this? And complete nullification of the first attack because he has never heard of such a thing. While the protagonist continues to hold his sword, he even tries to pull it, but starts to tremble like Kang, because he doesn't have the strength to take the sword out of there. And Kang asks if it's his turn, kicking mana into his hand and landing a punch right in the middle of the boy's abdomen. He notices that he hit, and so Shang Chun's resistance is activated, but the damage is only reduced by half. But in this Kang Tayson's Supreme Judgment ignores the defensibility, which is the opponent's defense, and so he takes 49 damage, and he even gets scared, but ends up realizing that it was only 49 damage, saying that's it, because he can't overcome the difference in attributes between an easy mode player and a hard mode player, and he becomes more and more known. But the protagonist notices that his life is more than 10,000, and so he adds power after power, doubling his attack, multiplying it squared, and also ignoring the defensibility, which is the opponent's defense, simply preparing another punch like Kang Tayson also with Saitama's ass face. And the boy asks him to wait, and the protagonist says it will be just one. Then just give it a little hit very lightly on the boy's neck, crushing him and the entire ground around him in an absurdly strong attack. And he causes 9,600 for damage to the boy in a single blow. Then the protagonist asks if he understands now, saying that this is really the Earth. And that boy remains in disbelief when he stops clowning around, questioning why the world is like this, and if things have reached that level. He asks if it wouldn't be better if he hadn't completed the labyrinth. It is said that when the world was still in its time of peace, something happened, and one day, the sky cracked and the monsters came out of that opening, and a final choice was given to humans. Easy mode, normal, hard mode, and solo mode. Players who entered the labyrinth after choosing the difficulty could only return to Earth after completing the labyrinth, and they just weren't counting on returning to a land dominated by monsters. And King says that they have nothing to do but save that world. And with that, the player goes to the protagonist saying that he did a good job, and the boy is surprised that he came there, and he says yes, because he had to live this fight. And he continues saying that the protagonist is incredible, because defeating a player on hard mode in one hit is for few people. But the protagonist asked what's special about defeating a weakling like that. But Zhang Yan says that he's not weak, and that he's a very strong protagonist, and he says that now things are cold and says that's why he didn't want to get involved. But Zhang Yan continues saying he's serious, asking how he got about that multiplication ability, talking about supreme judgment, ignoring defense, and he can't believe that those abilities exist. And he also asks what kind of cheat this ability to cancel the first attack is. And he says that only Kang has these abilities, asking how he got them. And the protagonist says he worked hard to have them. But Jong Yun says that he always says the same thing, and then another scream appears. And he notices that another player is arriving, noticing that there were a lot of them that day. But the protagonist thinks differently, thinking that maybe it's not that. And then a girl comes walking, and he says that what looks like Lita and Ian have returned. And inside that general room, he pauses under a huge bone of a gigantic mound. And the protagonist is surprised that they are worrying about the decoration while humanity is being extinct. And he says that those things irritate him too much. And he says that even with the monster outside, there is a person who could bring those things with her without getting a single scratch. And he is the only human who completed solo mode. But he asks why a woman like her is the strongest person in the world. And Tyan says that to stay obsessed with something is vital in a situation like yours, asking why he doesn't create one. And he asks him to talk about it when they have time to talk about it, asking why she called him, and they will have heard that he taught the hard mode newbie a lesson, or the easy mode player giving a lesson in hard mode. No matter how much she hears it, it's strange. And the protagonist sees all the girl's information with absurd levels and gigantic numbers. But anyway, she is currently scared. Then the protagonist asks if she wants Tasho, but she says she wants to check something, telling him to show her status window too, and he notices that she really wants to show off, asking what she has against the easy mode players. And the protagonist is leveled to 158, but all his numbers are extremely low, and she says that as expected, he is very weak. And the protagonist asks if she wants to fight him, so she says she is just looking, and has already talked about it, and still, these attributes are good for an easy mode player, while the protagonist is screwed by her. He says that the labyrinth is divided into 4 difficulties, and as soon as the player completes the labyrinth, all his evolution is paralyzed, thus beginning the difference between the difficulties. And the attributes of a hard mode player are 10 times higher than Taishan's attributes, but none of them could withstand a single hit from the protagonist. But the reason for this would be the abilities that the protagonist has, and so the girl tells him to stand still for a moment, and she activates the increase. And half of her base attack was added to her current attack, and also activates the addition. And her current attack is doubled, and just like perfect aim, she prepares to attack the boy. And it is said that her next attack is guaranteed to hit, while she launches that blast of power towards the protagonist. It is said that the skills can be acquired regardless of the difficulty, and the protagonist is not even affected by that blow, and just remains calm. And it is said that the qualities of the skills that Taishan achieved are absurd. He has the complete nullification of the first attack, and with that 0 damage is caused to the protagonist. And she says that she just wanted to do that, saying that it is nothing, and she talks about the complete nullification of the attack, supreme judgment, exponential attack, pause in time, saying that there are so many different skills that he must have, around 100 skills, and the protagonist says he has around 130, and she remembers that he had said he gained them while strategically exploring the tower. And she says that they all must have explored as he did, thinking that they should have focused on getting stronger, and not just getting out of the labyrinth. But he says that who knows, and that's now. In the past, but she says that not necessarily, because he's amazing. But he could win if he were a solo mode player, and it's said that Taishan's skills are strong, but most of them use attributes as a base. And everyone is sad about this, because if he were a hard mode player, or even a normal mode player, things would be easier for him, because in other words, the current protagonist can't use half of his skills. But at that the protagonist asks why they don't change the subject, telling them to read straight to the point, asking if she's back from patrol, and the girl says yes. And she says that the next wave will start soon, and the protagonist is in disbelief with this, remembering what this wave would be, and the monsters that come with it. So he thinks that they are definitely in deep shit. And he says that in a wave, monsters attack en masse, and every time a wave occurs, several people died in his territory and in the Shrank territory, and he says that humanity lost its during the first wave, and half of the hard mode players died during the second wave. And they only managed to protect a small town in the third. Tano, a 4th wave arrives, and he asks how many there are, and the girl says there are to S rank, several dozen a rank, and a few hundred B rank, not to mention that there is also an apostle, and the protagonist thinks that at the S rank, even there would be difficulty in finishing this, besides that they don't have many players who can deal with an A rank monster, and not to mention this apostle, who is stronger than an S rank, and their defeat would be inevitable. But then she says that they need to try to fight, saying that he fights against the 2 S rank, but in this he asks if she wants him to die, and she says that she needs to fight the apostle, and he is the only one besides her who can fight A rank monsters. And he knows this, and he starts calling the girl annoying while leaving there. and she asks if he is going to go out to tell the others. And he says that they need to at least have the chance to prepare themselves psychologically, or he asks if she wants them to die without even knowing it. And she says that this is a more sensible option. However, he says he doesn't agree that much and leaves her behind, so she thinks Tayessa is strong in being him. She knows the boy can lead them to victory, but she's still a bit strange while holding a rock, somewhat suspicious, because she must be planning something and already outside. Jongyun is really down, saying he knew this day would come, but their situation is shit, with everyone there crying, and the protagonist asks how he is. And he says he's already accepted, considering everything. They've done the impossible so far, and says that living this long, they already consider a blessing, but the protagonist says that blessing is shit, saying that he's going to die. But the protagonist remembers that guy who beat him up, because now that he thinks about him, he must be discredited. So they think he must have gone through a lot to get out of the labyrinth. So when he gets out, he receives the news that he's going to die and will never see his world again, thinking that the guy is really unlucky. So he asks how Kang is, and Jongyun thinks that he's probably the angriest one, since humanity probably wouldn't be extinct if they had done half of what the protagonist did. And so the wave begins, and several red rays fall from the sky, and the city is already darkening and changing a little, and the protagonist really takes over, saying that he's so angry that it's killing him inside, but asks what the boy wants him to say most. And so the monsters start appearing, and several hundred of them are gathering around the human city, and Jongyun gets surprised, asking him if he said he was going to fight which monsters, and he says that there are to rank S, and Jongyun simply says that he sees it in the afterlife, since he will probably go there before him, asking if he can wait, and the protagonist says he can let him, using his great jump from the wall and going after those monsters with everything. And he uses full surveillance in the sky, making a kind of mini map of the mobs to be able to find his biggest ones. And he sees the Terenkas together and goes straight down there, turning exactly at the point where they are, and he sees horrible beings with his own eyes. And when he looks, he asks if those monsters are happy to see him. And the system performs a stability check in mental confusion, fear, and instant death. And so they are all concluded, while the protagonist takes a sword. And it is said that he endured using the will of iron. His mental state will never be destabilized. And the boy stands face to face with those rank S monsters, and it is said that Kang's body has developed a stubborn physique, and with him face to face with those monsters, he already prepares to kill those ugly things, and with him face to face with Velgax and Mario's mushroom, the protagonist already starts to hope that none of those monsters are defense type, and he activates full surveillance, and that is Monster 7. And its life is in the hundreds of millions, and that thing jumps towards the protagonist, wanting to crush him, and falls right on top of him, flattening everything around. But in that, the protagonist moves out of the way and looks at him sideways, noticing that he has 148 million life, because it will take a long time for him to kill, and he begins activating the body acceleration, and notices that the other monster is Monster 5, a ranged attack type monster, and notices that it has 2 million HP, and that for him is actually fair, so Velgax goes after him. But he says he doesn't know about that. However, it's okay, he ends up going after Squidward, cutting off several of his tentacles, and the monster's health goes down little by little, with him dealing a few dozen damage with each attack. And the protagonist notices that the damage is reduced when he attacks the tentacles, and in that, he notices that he needs to hit the monster's head, but it also attacks again, gathering some energy in the tentacles and launching a lightning bolt directly at the protagonist. But in that, the nullification of the first attack is activated and 0 damage is dealt to him, and the protagonist notices that what appears, his attack goes in the direction the tentacles are pointing, and he notices that there is no delay at all, and it is almost impossible to dodge. And with that, with the player far away, the protagonist prepares to attack again. However, before that, realizes that the most he can do is predict the trajectory of those laser beams passing near him, and he thinks that it is possible to dodge if he focuses very well. But the longer he takes to understand things now, the worse it will be. So he activates acceleration, going all out towards Velgax, and he starts to think that he can extend that fight, attacking him directly, but he continues to cause ridiculous damage to that octopus, which attacks him again with its electricity. But the protagonist manages to use another ability, which is the cancellation of the second attack, and goes back to receiving 0 damage, and the octopus starts spitting blood now with him cutting inside. But then the protagonist gets out of there and appears on top of it, and now he prepares to attack the monster's head, but in that, the other one appears in front. The protagonist notices that the second monster is protecting the first one's head, and the defense type monster is protecting the long-range attack type, just when he foresees that he is in a dangerous situation, and he thinks that must be why they were together from the beginning. But still, he ends up noticing that he caught that monster, and he starts the battle, creating a barrier around the two, which apparently separates him from everything that is happening outside. And the ranged attack monster tries to hit them that are inside, but the attacks stop at that barrier, and it is said that for a minute, only Monster 7 can deal damage to the protagonist, And with him face to face with that monster that only knows how to defend itself, he realizes that now he has a chance, and he says that it would be easy if Tan were there, since she has incredible attributes for having completed solo mode. But he soon activates his addition, and his current attack is doubled, and the multiplication too, and the current attack is squared. And so he goes to the activated Supreme Judgment, which ignores defense skills, and the opponent's defense. And the protagonist thinks that the defense type can't deal damage to Tan there, so he has to deal with the ranged attack type first, and then finish off the defense type. But he can't do that. And it doesn't matter if it's the defense type monster or the ranged attack with those attributes. One attack from it would already kill him, and he thinks that 9604 is still not enough and goes back to using a little more rag. And he activates the reset ability, which resets the designated ability. And this ability of his now cannot be activated by men, and his multiplication is activated and his current attack is squared. And so the 9600 are multiplied a lot, and it is. So that now is the time to finish him, going after the defense monster. And the protagonist thinks that the only thing he can do is depend on these abilities, and 9600 for squared still doesn't reach 100 million, and that's why he will have to go to his limit, and he activates copy, and so his next attack will hit the target twice. And with that he manages to cause 92 million damage to Monster 7, exploding it. And with that attack, the gelatinous thing is broken into several pieces, falling around the protagonist. But in this, the barrier that protected the two is undone, and the long-range monster causes 22,500 damage to the protagonist, hitting him with that Green Lantern ray, putting the boy on the plate. But he still activates the resistance, and the fatal attack is nullified, and everything received within 5 seconds has been reduced to 0, but he still feels the pressure of that attack. After that, he is targeted again and realizes that all those attack nullifiers have been used up. And now he only has his resistance ability, and he goes after the monster again, but deals only 48 damage, and he says that from now on it will be a simple fight, dodge, attack, and repeat. But the problem is that his mana points are almost gone, and he realizes he has no abilities left, and there is no way to deal 2 million damage with just a basic attack. And so he would have to attack that monster 25,000 times, and he immediately thinks he will lose. And after a long time, the monster's HP was already reaching half, with the protagonist still dealing damage to it. So it will have 125,000, with the monster almost dying. And he continues to steadfastly attack the monster, however. But it is said that he is in the state of full concentration, and his body and mind have become one. And thus the miraculous power is placed in his soul, and he obtains the soul skill, Interception Augmentation. And with this, because he has escaped from the labyrinth, he cannot obtain the Interception Augmentation skill, and it is sealed. But the protagonist notices that he's not going to get it no follow that skill, and the monster is almost dead on the ground. But the protagonist continues to damage it anyway. And so he finally manages to kill Monster 5, after a hard fight of hours, and hours of him dealing damage in a ridiculous way to the monster. And so it is said that gods of all dimensions could not contain their astonishment with those feats. But in that the protagonist wonders how long it took him, because it seems like it was more than a month, noticing that those shitty attributes of his did not help at all. And so he finally leaves, because it is time to return after killing that monster. But while he returns, he uses his map skill and sees that there's still a monster alive with all the people around dead there, and walks among them and sees all those corpses there, and he says that they were bragging, saying that they were the last players alive in that world. So why is only he, an easy mode player, the only one alive? And he goes back to questioning himself why he returned with victory on his back, and then with the defeat, and he sees Zhang Yun dead on the ground. He went to the afterlife and kept his word, but he ended up leaving the boy behind. And he remembers when he still had a friend to share his days with, and he is sad about it, but ends up looking to the side, and also sees Lita and Aeon dead there. And that stone that was with her is lying on her thigh, and he notices that she is the only one who completed solo mode, and the strongest person in that world was still killed. And the one who killed her is that thing that is rising in front of him, and that is the apostle. My friend, he will have to fight against this. The last ones, it will be shit. And that apostle stands in front of the protagonist, and that thing tells him that he will die soon, but he tells him to shut up. And the system says that once again he successfully resists, and the apostle gets a little scared, and the protagonist goes after him, activating the true aim. And so he causes very little damage on the apostle, but still he calls the monster towards him. And after a while, the protagonist seems to be on his last legs, and so in the middle of all that chaos, he is face to face with the monster, but something that seems to be mixed with blood, that monster's body falls to the ground, and the protagonist is taken up with an attack from the creature, and he wonders if that is the end, while he is smashed to the ground after that damage, and so his HP reaches 0, and bravery is activated, and he will be forcibly alive for a minute. But he gets angry with the system, asking them to let him die in peace, because he can't feel from his waist down, and he probably thinks that his spine was hit next to his heart and bravery only delays his death and doesn't help at all. And so he watches that apostle monster going towards Taeyong, and he says he's going to die in a minute, and he thinks everyone knows that, and he gets more and more frustrated. But then something starts looking at the boy from the middle of a crack in the sky, and he thinks that if he had chosen another way, it would be different, because in the middle of that crack some claws come out. And the protagonist keeps thinking that even the normal way would be better than now, but then he remembers his past and thinks that it won't help. And he gets more and more angry, cursing all those useless people, and he says that they couldn't get strong enough because they just wanted to get out of that shit. Wondering how they can be so weak, even choosing normal or hard mode, and saying that if they had done half of what he did, they would still have a chance. But even frustrated, he finally falls. But he thinks he is in the past, and it was his choice, and he will not blame anyone. And now humanity has reached its end. But in that, the crystal next to the girl begins to shine, and he notices that she was also trying to protect something, and so he drags himself there. But the apostle is moved, and the protagonist tells him to stay right there, and he activates the last chance. And an ability can be used without any restrictions, and so he stops time, and he manages to activate the temporal pause. And the time of things within a radius of 100 meters will be stopped for 2 minutes. And the protagonist checks that, and that is the Ouroboros beetle. And it is a beetle of the gods that controls the cycle of all life, and can make a person go back in time once. And the protagonist is surprised by this, asking why he and Tam were with something like that. But then from the sky, that monster that was watching him comes out, and he says that he sees that thing later, before being eaten. And he uses that beetle, and with that the protagonist goes back in time seeing his old self, with someone asking why he was born, and he says that when he was little, his parents used him to relieve stress. And he believed his words after being beaten several times, and began to think that he was worthless, and this distrust of his led him to choose the easy way. But now, that is not the case, because he knows he has talent, and so he thinks that this time, he will do everything differently. And he wakes up now in his old room, surprised, remembering that that is the place where he used to live, and notices that he really went back in time, and realizes that there is a little less than an hour left until the next new year, and remembers that on January 1st, 2020, something happened that he could not imagine, because that was when the earth collapsed. So he thinks that it has been a long time since he ate pizza, enjoying the time he has. And he says that all they ate after the apocalypse was potatoes and monster meat, and while he's enjoying it, he thinks and is surprised, because who would have thought that Litam would have an item that would make him go back in time? But he wonders why she didn't use the same thing, because he knew Litam would run away. But he thinks that doesn't matter now, going out and looking at the sky, thinking that it will happen soon. And there are only 2 minutes left. And he says that all the human beings in the world are counting the seconds, wishing a happy new year, thinking that things will get better. But unfortunately, as soon as the new year dawned, the world changed, and something appeared in the sky, and everyone heard it, asking if they are doing any event nearby. And exactly at midnight, the monsters began to invade, and they wonder what that is. But the protagonist is the only calm one in the whole city, and he says he was shocked at the time, but looking back now, he knows that one of these is rank V, and a monster that the player in hard mode can easily kill, and he realizes that it's finally time. And so everyone receives a notification saying that their world is going to be destroyed by the invaders, and the weapons they manufacture are useless against them. And while he receives that notification, a helicopter will broadcast everything on TV, and then that notification tells them not to worry, because a merciful being who took pity on them decided to give everyone a chance, while several people are killed. In that invasion, he says that they will all have to choose, ordering them to choose what is best for them and enter the labyrinth. And so in the middle of all that chaos, they order them to complete and gain power. And the protagonist thinks that it is really shit that is happening, and he says that they just want something to entertain themselves. And then he remembers his past, and this time he goes in the right way, thinking that it is time to start. And with that, the protagonist talks a little more about the modes, which is easy mode, where you will be blessed with an abundance of food and resting areas in each labyrinth, and even those who are common and fragile can pass, as long as they dedicate themselves. And in normal mode, food is in short supply. There are definitely fewer resting areas in the labyrinth than in easy mode, and so, although it will be difficult to survive, you will be able to get through it if you do your best, and do not despair. And in hard mode, the difficulty will test your limits, and food and resting areas will be severely lacking, and monsters will throw their lives away just to kill you. And unless you find some safety, you will die a horrible death. And in solo mode, this is a mode where you are completely alone, and you will not be able to meet anyone who came from your world, and the only things you will be able to see there are hostile beings, monsters, and NPCs, and the protagonist chooses exactly this one. And it is said that in that place that tests your luck, talent, and desire to strategy, he won't be able to survive, and if he values his life, he shouldn't choose this difficulty. And with that, the protagonist wonders if that person who is watching him, pulling all those strings, is beyond that and tells her to wait for him. He selects solo mode, and may his luck be well honed. because he will need it. And so he falls into another world and thinks about that feeling of nostalgia and familiarity. And so he says that after a long time, he returned there once again, and he soon goes to look at the forum, seeing that there is already another message. And he says he doesn't know who that guy is, but he seems to be insightful, and says that the community is the only way to talk to people in other difficulties. And he says that there, more advanced people share methods and strategies, and this is of great help. And he can only effectively use the community later, so now there is no point in using it. And he says that what he needs to check now are the things he learned about him, and he remembers her asking him what the NPCs in easy mode. And he says that they just repeat their programmed responses like NPCs themselves, and asked if hers were different, and she says that the NPCs in solo mode, they act intelligently and are able to move freely as if they were real people. As the protagonist continues walking forward, he sees a person standing near the entrance. And note that he is the gatekeeper at the entrance to the labyrinth, and I'm in easy mode. He's just a normal old man with white hair, but in this, he notices that there's already someone there, because he thought it would take at least a month, and so the protagonist notices that that guy is stronger than Lee Taeyong, and he's surprised that that guy is a gatekeeper. He congratulates the protagonist first of all, because he's Broken Man, the guardian who protects that place, and also his guide. And the protagonist finds his name strange, and he says that he's the one who failed in the attempt, and became the gatekeeper, asking if that's not kind of cool. And he believes that he heard the summary outside, and that his world is facing destruction by the invaders, and this opportunity that the magnanimous transcendent is giving to his people. But he says that this mercy is unnecessary, because only being annihilated would lead to more happiness. And the protagonist observes this, because he speaks as if he had already experienced it, and says that what Taeyong says was true, because NPCs in solo mode are actually living beings, people who came from destroyed worlds. And the protagonist, observing the broken so much, leaves the boy a little puzzled, because that bum is very calm, and if he came from a peaceful world, he should be freaking out right now. And he says he was thinking about hitting him and then explaining, but he doesn't show any reaction, so he simply says that that's the labyrinth, and some people call it a tower, but he can call it whatever he wants. And it has a total of 100 floors, and there are big changes every 10 of them, naturally. And it gets more difficult the further the person goes. And since he will have to deal with food and water on his own while in the labyrinth, he will have to find any information he needs on his own, and that's all he can tell him. But the protagonist asks if that's really all, and the boy asks if he wants him to explain what's on the first floor, the second, etc., saying that there's a guy inside there, and he sells things, telling him to ask him. And so Taeyong starts saying that that doorman was very annoying, and he would hit him if he complained. And she almost died before even entering the labyrinth, and the protagonist remembers this well, saying that he should shut up now. And so he tears the space in front of the protagonist, but says that it is worth teaching at least the basics. And from there, he pulls out a huge spear, scaring the boy. And with that spear, he swings it next to the protagonist and stops well before hitting him. And the protagonist is very calm looking at it, and Brokey thinks he is strange pulling out that spear, telling him to get that equipment, giving the protagonist the worn leather armor with the defense +1, and apparently it can block small scratches along with the rusty sword with attack +1, and it looks like it will break soon. And the protagonist notices that it is copper, so Brokey asked what is wrong, because he does not like it, and the protagonist says he really didn't like it. And Brokey finds this even stranger, and the protagonist asks what it was, but he thinks he's nothing, and ends up giving something else to King, giving him a worn wrist protector with one more defense. It lost its value after being used for a long time, and it seems like it can block at least Teoma's bite. Then King asks what that is, because he doesn't think Teoma taught him to receive a protector like that. Then Brokey says that he's receiving some extra skills and things, and he can check it out himself, telling the girl to just go away, and Kang just thanks him for sticking it in the foot, while Brokey wishes him good luck. But as he falls behind, he notices that the guy was smiling, as if he was eager to enter the labyrinth. Then he says that as a gatekeeper, he encountered many challengers who were called Genes, but none of them managed to finish that labyrinth. But that guy now, he's definitely different. He says it's not simply talent or skill, but something more fundamental like the power to survive. He says it would be good if he survived. But while the pro is inside, they send him other messages, saying that it's a labyrinth created by a great wizard long ago, and there's a rumor that a wish will be granted to anyone who finishes it. This is a sealed world, and terrible beings move about silently, and living beings die. And it's said that everything there exists to oppress him, but if he can cross that deep, dark hell, eternal glory will await the boy. Once outside, he arrives at the first floor, the entrance to the labyrinth. Beings that die if stabbed live there, and the powers there aren't very strong. The protagonist, complaining, should begin. Here it is the beginning of your mission. And so it is said that there are many treasures and hidden areas there, and depending on the secrets you find, different rewards will be given when the floor ends. And here it is just the beginning of the mission with the protagonist and him ahead. He must defeat the boss of the first floor and pass, and the reward is a random potion and a status increase, and the secret reward is not said. And he remembers Lee asking him if they have any merchants in easy mode, and the protagonist says yes. Then she asks what they were like, and he says they were a simple merchant as he bought a potion and left. Then she says it is not like that in solo mode, and they sell a lot of things, and he soon questions if she is bragging, and she tells him to look, showing a pure black bracelet, which is an incredibly strong item that reduces damage taken by 50%. And he is surprised that they sell things like that in the shop, and says there was much more than that, but she had no gold enough, so he couldn't buy it. And the protagonist is surprised, because if he could buy all the items in the market, then he would probably be stronger than she was. So he says that he barely paid attention to it, because he didn't care much. But the situation has changed now, and so he goes to the merchant, who is the Lost King, and the protagonist just greets him, and he notices that the boy seems intelligent and asks what his name is. And the protagonist explains this, asking if he is the merchant, and the dwarf soon asks what he will do if he goes. And the protagonist starts to look around, but says that there is nothing in that store. Then the dwarf starts to smile, saying that he is spoiled, saying that if he wanted to show off all his items, an entire floor would not be enough, and he has no intention of showing his babies to that boy. And the protagonist gets curious, because he is a salesman who doesn't sell anything, so he asks why he is there. He says he is there because he wants to, saying that he lost his kingdom because of that insanity, and he is suffering there for nothing. But all he has to say now is that he doesn't want to show his babies to a spoiled brat who doesn't know anything, and the protagonist just stays calm. Then the dwarf says that if he can show him what he is capable of, then it will be another story, pointing to a corridor that is right behind him. And when the protagonist looks at that corridor, the Lost King Comanche goes and comes back alive, and then he will show his babies. So he thinks that the condition to buy is survival, and soon asks the Lost King if that's all he has to do. Then he notices that the boy is really strange, and the protagonist finds it even stranger than he's saying, asking if he has to clear the entire maze for him to show him his wares. But the king says that's not it, and the boy just says he'll go there, turn around and leave, and the Lost King finds it very strange, because normally he just stands there scared and trembling, asking how that boy is so confident. But the protagonist thinks that it's not like he feels fear or anything. But from outside, the king wonders how someone like that can exist, because it doesn't matter, since he won't come back alive. But a while later, the protagonist is already in the middle of that maze, and it's a corridor, then it's a room. A floor layout is the same as easy mode, and just looking at it, he thinks that there doesn't seem to be any danger. But further ahead, he hears a noise that reveals to him that what he was thinking is not true. And then a very scary rat appears near him, along with a human head, and that is a giant rat. And when the rat goes after the protagonist at an absurd speed, he notices that the boss of the 5th floor in easy mode is just a random monster there. And that rat goes after him to bite the protagonist's shin, and he takes 10 damage at first. But the boy doesn't seem to care much about it, and the protagonist notices that he is a big rat with a very low defense. But due to his great speed, it is difficult to follow with the eyes, and it took a long time for them to defeat him. But if this guy is just a random monster on the 1st floor, you can feel the difference now. And the protagonist says that he is as fast as he thought, and tries to hit him, but fails. And the rat jumps back waiting for his next move, and he says that when they fought him in easy mode, the players work together to be able to chase him until he's tired. But now, besides being alone, his stats are lower than that time, so logically speaking, this is an impossible fight for him. And he starts to think that it's sad that Latayan told him that he ran away at the beginning, because since forever the players who passed the 1st floor in solo mode never got into a fight with the giant rat, because even if they went in like that, they would end up dead and devoured by those things. And so he remembers what the king must be wanting with him, and Fleck knows what he's wanting, because the way the rewards are given in the labyrinth are simple, and if he achieves something that the others couldn't, or achieves an achievement that everyone can respect, then he will be rewarded accordingly. While he takes damage from the rat, will also be able to deal damage to it, and he says that his goal is to become stronger than anyone there, and he tries to hit the rat, but misses by a hair, and the creature flies away, and he says that if he can't maintain his speed, he can at least predict where he's going to move. And the rat starts to get scared of the protagonist by the way he's fighting, and he notices that he's also a real living being, and no matter what this creature is, these movements aren't instantaneous, contracting his leg muscle and also puffing out his chest. And he notices that the rat is going to run away now, and the giant rat starts to get intimidated by the protagonist, and his ability to think starts to diminish. Then he says it's hard to imagine what's going on with that small brain, since he's blocking his ankles from his attacks. Then he goes to the next easy target, and since he can't jump that high, he'll aim for his arm, and so he tries to aim by biting there, but ends up hitting that bracelet he put there and can't bite, and the protagonist says that he's already dead while lifting the rat and finally kills it. And so he attacks the giant rat that was immobilized, and because of being in this way, he receives increased damage, and for damage is dealt to the rat. And so he continues dealing 5 and more until he returns to the king, who is surprised to see the boy because he came back from going there with the giant rat's meat. And so a guy in the chat starts communicating, asking if he doesn't think the seller is a pain in the ass, and asks why he keeps trying to always have the last word while selling his items. And Taeyeon agrees with him, saying that the seller should behave like a seller, asking why he acts like that, saying that he seriously wanted to stab him with his sword, but he can't even do that because he would definitely get beaten, and says that it makes him very angry. And so the lonely king is surprised, asking if the protagonist survived, and then he questions if the king wanted him to be dead, but the old man starts to say no. And so the protagonist shows him the meat of the giant rat with a quality of 96% and is told that he can eat it if he needs, as well as he gets the leather of the giant rat with a quality of 95%, which seems to be relatively warm. And the boy asks the king if he buys items, especially since it is a store, asking how much he can get for those two. And so the king is surprised that he killed one, but says that he didn't even try to escape, but just killed one. And he questions why the king is so surprised, because if he killed one, he killed one, and he says that it is real, and not to mention the very high quality, and that means he managed to hunt it perfectly with precision. And he is surprised that all of this was done by a newbie who just entered the labyrinth, and the protagonist just watches him. And the king says that he has met his requirements, saying that he will open the shop for him. Then the protagonist asks what he sells, and the king says that he sells everything, and he just has to say what he wants. Then the protagonist asks if he has a tower shield, and he talks about those big shields, and the protagonist confirms that he does, saying that it has to be one big enough to be wielded with both hands. And he asks why a shield among all the rest, and he says that he was thinking of just crushing them. And so the king is surprised, saying that this is the correct answer, opening the golden door behind him, and the protagonist is surprised looking at it, while the king asks, how about that one over there? And it is that heavy tower shield with attack +1, defense +5, very robust, and seems to be able to block many attacks. And so the protagonist thinks that this is more than enough, because in easy mode he can only get one item of that around the 7th floor, and the king charges him the price of 500 gold, but the protagonist only has 243 gold, and needing double that, he thinks he will have to come back later, and he thinks that about 7 rats should be enough. And so the king asks where he is going, and the protagonist just says he needs more gold to buy that. But then the king tells him not to worry about it because he will give it to him for free. And he receives the shield of Tui Robusto, while the boy doesn't understand much well. And the king says that he must have about 250 gold, and there are some things he can buy with that amount, asking the boy to wait, bringing a bunch of potions. And so he wonders what's going on with him receiving so much stuff from that king without any reason, because this is completely different from what Talon told him. And the king asks why the boy is moving away, telling him to get that, questioning why he's causing all this chaos when he's trying to be nice to the boy, asking if he can't do him a favor, telling him to think of it as a small investment. And the protagonist doesn't quite understand what he wants to say, and he just tells him to get it because those are the items he can afford right now. And so he realizes that he doesn't want to tell him why, but he also notices that most of the items are potions, and they are magic potions that recover up to 50% of HP, and he notices that some of them temporarily increase his attack and others his speed, and they are essential to finish the labyrinth, but he says they're not what he needs right now. And he heard it's very hard to get potions in solo mode, and they're primarily used on the higher floors, not the lower ones, and he has no need to buy them right now. And in fact, those potions are kind of a trap in themselves, and he says he needs to buy more important items than that right now. And he looks at the rudimentary bow with accuracy +20, which seems to be a bit difficult to use, but he also looks at the rudimentary arrows with attack +1, which actually look like arrows. And he says he needs a way to attack from a distance, and with the bow. An annoying situation would be a walk in the park, and he asks how much the red hide is worth. And the king says at that level of quality, around 70 gold, and the protagonist then says he'll sell it and buy the bow and arrow. And so the king is all happy for what the boy is doing, so he hands it to him glowing with happiness. And the protagonist, he starts to wonder again what the hell is going on there, because he's sure something has changed. But the king asks if the boy knows that his life doesn't recover in the labyrinth, and the protagonist says he does know where there's a place called the Spring of Life on the 1st floor where you can recover your life, and he can use it an infinite number of times as long as he doesn't leave that floor. And he says he'll show him the location, saying he'll mark it on his map, and there's a crazy old man there but that shouldn't be a problem for him. And the protagonist remembers that the king told him to be walking about the location of the Spring of Life, but she said she insulted him a lot while he was talking, telling her to go in there and just starve to death. And he wonders what changed the salesman's attitude. My friend, basically you're going through the same steps he does, and he's becoming the guy's disciple. And he's wondering why he's being treated so well, and he starts to wonder if there's a difference in their methods. And he says that Itaean couldn't kill the giant rat and just ran away, but it didn't run away and killed it and even came back, wondering if that was the difference that changed the king's attitude towards him. And currently, he's already going after the rats and killing them with his shield. And so the rat is immobilized, receiving increased damage, and the protagonist gets more and more victories over eat off those rats. And he says he has many questions he can't answer at the moment, and so his increased interception skill is automatically activated, and he is surprised by that skill. And so the system gives him an agility that permanently increases by 1 more. And he says that before, when he managed to kill the first giant rat, several status windows appeared in front of him, and he wonders why he has so many of them for killing a random mob. And he notices that despite these basic skills, he still has skills he gained on floors 20 and 40 of easy mode. And he says he didn't think he would get those on the first floor of solo mode and designated assignment and other various things, but he notices that soul skill, proficiency, and increased interception is a 100% proficiency, and his soul has experienced a higher plane of existence, and each time his high-dimensional soul wins, it will steal the opponent's power. And he remembers when he was against that S rank in a state of complete concentration, and his body and mind became one. And so a miraculous power is implanted in the boy's soul, and he obtains the increased soul interception ability. But since he escaped the labyrinth, he is unable to obtain the ability, so it is sealed. And the boy remembers this because it was when he fought that rank S. And he says that a system screen opened after he took one. 2 million IPV, and he couldn't look properly because he was very tired, wondering if this ability was released because he returned to the labyrinth. And this is an ability he kept even after time returned, and so he continued forward because this was a question he couldn't answer at that time. And it's the same thing there. He needs to continue pursuing his goal of becoming stronger than everyone else. So he says that the Spring of Life should appear right after that corridor they really took, that unnecessarily long path. But in that moment, another giant rat appears in front of him, and he is surprised by this because he thinks that encountering a monster in the corridors is something normal. But then other rats appear and surround the protagonist, and he begins to be in a somewhat difficult situation while being surrounded by those rats. And the protagonist, observing all the surroundings in that complicated situation, sees the rats there, and 3 of them have already been able to surround a human, and even with their tiny brains, they are able to realize that they have the advantage. However, he is running confusion and also fear checks, and so he notices that one of them is more scared going after the monster, and then he starts to resist with super focus and tries to hit the rat in every way, but the rat dodges by very little, and the protagonist thinks he can't even blink because he has seen many players die after getting emotional about the situation, and so he obtains the unshakable mind, and all the statuses begin to increase, and the protagonist melts them all by smashing one into the wall. And he says that with the level increasing and checks completed, these statuses have increased, and with that, he can react and hit them with ease, thus killing with more ease. And so the system announces that he won the fight against a giant rat, and his level increases, and the last one left starts to get intimidated. And the giant rat's judgment begins to fail, and with the monster, the protagonist tells him to come, and the rat tries to go straight to his feet, and he thanks him for approaching, so openly using the shield to kill and finish off the last one. And as he continues, he leaves the labyrinth, and here it is the resting area, an enemy cannot enter there. It is the place that makes him relax. And so he discovers the Spring of Life for the first time, and the discovery bonus is given, and his intelligence is permanently increased by 1 more. In addition to that, his mana is also increased by 2 more. And the protagonist notices that most areas of the labyrinth have monsters, with the exception of the shop and that spring, a kind of safe zone. And then when he drinks that, all stats are recovered and his condition is improved, and he feels that it is refreshing. If he reached it, it was as if he had slept. But his mental fatigue will continue to increase, so he needs to take a nap. And the next day, he notices that a whole day has passed, and he says that there must be something in the community now. And when he reads that, he realizes there are several people asking about the labyrinth, whether they should enter it. And they also say that since there are no answers from the people who have already entered, they think not. And a guy starts saying that he's going to end up going crazy, while the girl asks if there's anyone to clear the first floor with her. And he realizes that several other people are asking for information, asking if anyone knows what the first monster is. And people are getting more and more desperate with what they see. And the protagonist says that just as he thought, most of the messages are from solo players. And in other modes, people can meet and talk in person, but solo players can only communicate through the community. And then he sees that Litaean is sending messages to, asking how he should do this. And he is surprised, because the super strong and confident Lataean is so confused at first. So he says that maybe it's not like that, and he says that, stopping to think. The status window he saw back there, when she noticed how strong the protagonist was, made him realize that maybe she was just a scaredy cat who hid himself until the end. Then he says that it's only been a day since the labyrinth opened, and solo players will usually enter after spending a month outside. So there must be a lot of people still alive, and he starts sending messages saying that the rewards in solo mode definitely match the difficulty, and although she missed out on a lot of rewards after quickly defeating the boss, Lataean managed to become the strongest player, and he messages the girl as well as everyone else in solo mode. And then he says that the first floor in solo mode is basically just clearing, and he complained about what will happen because he thinks it will be difficult to trust a baseless text and enter the labyrinth, and even if they believe it, he doesn't know how they will react. And among the tens of thousands of people who entered solo mode, the only survivor was Lataean, so he thinks he has to leave, taking that giant rat meat and looking at it, wondering whether he should eat it or not. But he realizes that thinking about the objective, it must work, and so he throws it in, eating raw meat, and the taste of it is certainly evident in his face. And so the condition checks start running, and the check ends up failing, and he has food poisoning. And this status will shorten his life constantly for 2 days, unless he keeps taking healing or health potions, and then he will die. And a situation like that is desperate for beginners, and that's why people who have suffered from this tell everyone to cook before eating. But since he is next to that source that can cure his conditions, he keeps filling his belly with that, and he says that it is difficult to get food in the labyrinth, and there are emergency rations in the store, but they are super expensive and are in short supply, and so he starts and keeps eating that stuff. And he says that eventually he will have to eat the creatures of the labyrinth, and the verification keeps failing, and he gets poisoning again and again. And he says that since space is limited, there are times when he must eat raw meat, and if he gets food poisoning in these situations, it is the worst that can happen. And so he heals his condition more and more until the system notes and sends him a message saying that he has gone through several diseases and has built up resistance. He has obtained continuous conditional activation ability, resistance to diseases, and the protagonist gets the result he wanted. But he says that this changes if he acquires resistance, and proficiency has 1%. And he resists all types of diseases currently, and he also resists diseases acquired through food. And he thinks that as his proficiency increases, the correct thing to do is just use the skill to become immune to food poisoning. And although it is a skill he can hardly obtain after contracting all types of diseases, he wonders what the next skill he will obtain should be. And then he gets into that water thinking he doesn't like it, but still, he puts himself down there and holds his breath, becoming unable to breathe. But he thinks it hurts, but he needs to endure it, because he thinks that hearing someone say that drowning is the most painful way to die. So he keeps doing this until he needs to get up almost dying, and the system says that he didn't breathe until he almost died. And he obtained the conditional activation skill Immortal Breath. And also he said that he felt the touch of death. He obtained the conditional ability by a thread. So he thinks this should work, and I hope it works. And the Immortal Breath skill allows him to hold his breath for a long time, and currently this time is twice the normal. And he says that it is a skill that increases the ability to hold one's breath, and it will be useful in areas where the air is poisoned. And he says that since he needs to be underwater until the brink of death, most people don't have this skill, but he can get the skill by a hair's breadth along with this, so it's not so bad. However, he notices something different. He questions why his proficiency in this is already at 50% in this line of death, and it is said that he can detect when he is close to death and activates in most dangerous situations, and he says it's already at 50%, so it's the same thing as last time. Noticing that he can inherit skills that don't depend on his current physique, he wonders if this is a skill connected only, and not just to his body, but if so, his calm mind and detection wouldn't be at 1%. But he currently doesn't know why this is. He says that unexplained events happen frequently in a labyrinth, and there's no way to keep trying to explain them all. And so he opens his inventory once again and pulls out a sword, going for it because he doesn't have much time and has many more skills to learn. So he can't stop now. And in this, the protagonist is talking to the boy also in solo mode, Jinryo, who asks the protagonist if this is really the right way, saying that he is crazy. But the protagonist says that something with high risk also brings high gains, asking if he has never heard that before, saying that if the difference is too big, he will never win anything. So now is the best time. Then the boy says that this is not the problem, saying that he really apologizes, but he can't do it. And so he says that it's fine, but tells the boy not to complain later. He gets very upset about it, asking how he should do it. And then he tells the boy that he's just a human being, telling him to relax, saying that besides that anomaly, no one else has achieved one. And the protagonist continues there in his training and activates the hanging by a thread mode while he's training his fencing. He says that combining things is the key to gaining skills. For example, if certain skills and situations coincide, a new skill can be gained. He continues training his fencing, and he says that being able to withstand twice as long while using hanging by a thread is obviously limited when he's stopped, but he keeps training, and the system rewards him, saying that he attacked several times while he was hanging by a thread, and he gained a special activation skill, thread attack, and it is said that he learned more than 10 skills, and is in a state that can boast of deserving those skills. He earned the title of skilled player, and the protagonist thinks this is wonderful. Looking at his sword that is almost a carcass, he says that the way he can read the movements of the giant rat, he can also read the movements of humans, and thread attack is a skill that helps him change the rhythm of everything. And he says that this was a great skill he used while crossing the labyrinth, and so he opens the status window, remembering that he and Taeyong said that when they passed the first floor, her agility was at 13, and he is not much faster than her, since he is a level 21, and so he says that he can slowly build up his main skills. He says that main skills are usually worth more than 10 basic ones, or are capable of overcome a great difference in status, and he thinks precisely about addition or multiplication, or absolute judgment that can discern hidden elements. He also talks about attack nullification that eliminates the result of a single attack, or temporal pause that stops time around him. He says that all of these are core abilities, and having just one already gives him a gigantic advantage over players of the same level. But in this he keeps moving forward, and he begins to notice that perhaps this is exactly why the rights to obtain them are somewhat different. For example, complete vigilance can only be obtained after evolving the detection skill 2 or 3 times. But if there is a core ability that can be acquired on the first floor, which may become more difficult to obtain later, and another giant rat appears behind him, and the protagonist thinks he needs to acquire it quickly, trying to give his leg to the rat to bite, he takes for damage, and 3 in a row, and the rat stays stuck there biting the protagonist. He thinks he's there biting hard. He thinks he can't defend himself because he needs to take more damage, and the damage accumulates. And the protagonist, with all those instances of damage, is getting closer to death, and he thinks he needs a little more. So, when he's right on the brink of death, he attacks the mouse, taking it away from him. And self-proficiency of by a thread increases once again to 3%. And the proficiency of calm mind also increases again. And so the rat tries to attack him again, aiming at another foot, but the protagonist, as he is already on the verge of death, does not let him hit him, placing it in front of the shield, making the rat fall stunned. And I believe he completely blocked the opponent's attack and gained the special activation ability block. And he says that this is a good ability, which nullifies attacks with damage lower than a certain amount. But it was not the ability he was expecting, and so, when the rat attacks him again, he stops once again using the shield, and then he thinks that the ability resisted, because it nullifies damage that would result in death once, and all the damage received, for a while. So he says that no one has achieved this ability, except himself. And in the past, when he killed several lizards, his friend, Taeyong, go after him, and he asks how he learned to resist. And the girl speaking here too, he's curious, wondering why he's the only one who gets these stolen skills. He talks about the skills, or that the way to learn skills in the labyrinth is very simple. He can receive a skill from someone, or if the person achieves something that others can't, he's rewarded with an equivalent skill. Finally, he can try to reproduce an effect similar to the skill. He obtained it by a hair's breadth while holding his breath, because he brandished his sword when he was in that state. He won the attack by a hair's breadth. With that monster already in berserk mode, he's attacking. He says that if he can learn to resist, the skill that completely nullifies the damage of an attack can kill. So, he wonders what should be done. And so, with the rat very close to him, he thinks it's simple, and he needs to block repeated attacks that would kill him. With him stopping that rat once again, the system says he blocked multiple attacks that would lead to his death. He gained the continuous conditional activation skill resist. The boy starts laughing at this and finally finishes off that rat. He says it's a skill that can save your life, and it's a big mistake not to go after it because you're scared. And so in the past, when he said the same thing to the other two, they think that Kang Taesung really is a complete stranger, and they both feel a little embarrassed to say this to the protagonist. And he says that at some point, the people who hear this will respond accordingly, but this is the labyrinth, and those who don't venture certainly don't gain. And he returns to that fountain, drinking water, recovering, and he says that it's great because thanks to this he increased his proficiency a lot, being by a thread, and also his calm mind, asking if there are any other skills he needs to learn, and says that he must have some, but he had more than 200, so it will be difficult to remember until someone comes close to him. And that old man smiles, saying that he finally has a visitor, and it is said that he found a person looking for God, and they say that it is a great answer. And the protagonist tries to grab his weapon and thinks that monsters cannot enter the spring of life. Noticing that one must be an NPC, he pulls out his shield. And he heard that most NPCs in solo mode are psychopaths. And so that guy asks if he is an adventurer, and the protagonist doesn't quite understand that. And the old man says that he refers to those who conquer the labyrinth like that, asking if he is one. Then the protagonist says that's it, and it finally ends remembering Taeyeon, saying that when he was resting in the spring of life, on the first floor a grandpa knight appeared, and it was someone who had served a god or something like that. But he doesn't remember what she said later, because he needs to remember as soon as possible. But then that old man goes all out on him and is about to give the protagonist a huge punch. And he simply tells the boy to try to block it, and the system says that Uncell activated a non-lethal attack. And the protagonist is in disbelief seeing that hand in front of him, and Ansel's attack goes directly between his eyes. And so the protagonist's ability is activated by a thread, with him noticing that he is going to die, but in that he raises his effort, and that old man hits his shield, and the protagonist manages to hold it by a hair's breadth, but wonders what that blow is, and seeing the boy resist his blow, that gentleman starts to laugh, and so the protagonist dodges the punch, throwing it to the side, and thus deflecting part of the protagonist's power wave punch from that old man. And so it is said that he received an incredibly powerful attack, and his strength increased by 1, and he also deflected an incredibly powerful attack, and he obtained the conditional activation ability, deflect, and the old man tries to hit him again, telling the boy to hold that punch longer, this time with his other hand. And the protagonist sees that attack from too close and thinks he can't dodge and he should forget technique, because the difference in strength between the two is too great. And so that man throws the protagonist away with that attack, but still he thinks that it is incredible, because he thought it would do at least 100,000 damage, but he only received 30,000. And see the boy being smashed straight to that wall, he still remains alive even though he is smashed all over. And it is said that the non-lethal attack was activated and the damage was nullified. Then he notices that he destroyed a maze wall with a single blow, wondering what the hell is this, because the doorman was also strong. And he begins to notice that solo mode is really full of monsters, and that gentleman says he was impressed because he managed to block that attack with the shield in that split second. Besides that, the boy had the audacity to drop the shield to be able to reduce the damage. It's something very impressive. Then Kang says that he couldn't just stand still and take the punch, and the old man laughs, saying that he really couldn't, and says that he wasn't planning to kill him because that's what a non-lethal attack is, and says that even if he had attacked him lethally, he would have resisted. So he thinks that wouldn't be a problem. And so the protagonist asks if he managed to realize that, and the old man says that fighting tooth and nail for his life while hanging by a thread is really something impressive, and his skills are impressive too, because he never imagined that he would deflect his attack with his current attributes. And the protagonist says that he knew that those NPCs would be aware, but he is in doubt that he knows the skill, because not even Taeyong knew about it. And the crown says that, being honest, he worried that he was a weakling, but he had a wrong impression because he passed with mastery, and so asks what his name is as an adventurer. Then Kang teases and introduces himself to him, and the crown says that this was a happy encounter. Blessed be that miracle. And he is the one who searches for a god, and his name is Enzo. Meanwhile, there is current Taeyong is very sad, because those damn rats are persistent and are after her. But then that same crown appears behind the girl while she thinks she is safe. And when she turns around hearing a noise, she sees that old man's hand very close to her face. And he ends up having to stop his punch so as not to throw the girl away. And he says that he is a cowardly weakling and leaves the girl behind without understanding anything of what is happening. And the protagonist says that Taeyong told him that the knight gave him a look of contempt and left. And after that she never saw him again. But what is happening to him is completely different. He asks if he can ask him something and goes to tell him that of course he can ask. And the protagonist questions why he attacks people out of nowhere, asking if it is to mock the weak. And he says that that is not the reason. And he is a paladin, and asks why he, of all people, a paladin, would oppress the weaker ones. And then he says that he only does this to evaluate the visitors. And the protagonist questions about this evaluation, and he says that he just wants to see if the person has what they need to survive there, and they deserve their recognition. But there is no more irritating person than a person who doesn't understand themselves and can pass that easily, and he just thanks them and says that now he understands everything because he evaluates people based on their sense of value, and at least he has no reason to be their enemy. And the protagonist confirms Enzo's name again, and he says that his glorious father chose that name, and he questions if he was looking for a god, asking if he can know which one it is, because the protagonist explains that there are many gods in the labyrinth, and there are many, and they test players and give rewards, but most players don't know much about them because they only exist in solo mode. And thanks to Litaean having spoken to him with Riven in exhibition, he was able to learn many things about him. And Enzo says, of course, saying that the more people know about her, the better, and he serves a goddess, Levi Neneth, and everyone worships her, and calls out her name from dawn to dusk. She is a wonderful goddess who connects with those she loves, and there is no other goddess more worshipped than her in her world. And unfortunately, her world was destroyed, so he is the only one who remembers her. And the protagonist questions if he went to that labyrinth looking for her, and Enzo says which is exactly that, but he didn't find anything about her. And the protagonist thinks about Levi Neneth and says he knows this goddess. And thanks to Litayan, he knows which floor she is on, and the problem is that she is simply dead, and she told him that. The goddess had been cruelly torn apart when she found her, and so she talked about it in the chat with everyone, asking why she is there, saying that she thinks she is going to vomit, and he says that even Litayan, who faced and went through countless hardships, he wonders if he should tell the truth to Enzo. But Levi Neneth soon asks if he can ask the boy something, asking if he is in a hurry to get out of the labyrinth, and the protagonist says he is not, and says that his goal is not to finish the labyrinth, but to become stronger, exploring and obtaining all the rewards. And so Enzo applauds the boy, saying that this is incredible, asking if he would like to learn Levi Neneth's skills from him. So the protagonist accepts this with great pleasure, and Enzo finds this strange, because he did not even hesitate, and thought he would remain unanswered for a few minutes. But the boy says he has no reason to refuse, and says that the NPC in the labyrinth is so strong that he can't even imagine where he got so much power. Why would he refuse such a proposal? And he questions what the old man wants in return, and he says it's nothing, telling him to consider it as his apology. And the protagonist questions about this apology, and he says it's for attacking him out of the blue, and even if it was a test, he used violence with someone he'd never seen before. It's an act he should deeply regret as a good paladin. But in this Kane questions if it wouldn't be much better if he hadn't even attacked him. But he says no, because that's something else. And the reason he's offering his apology is because he's someone who deserves an apology. And if it weren't like that, he would have just spit on him and simply left. So he thinks that the guy there is completely crazy, and Enzo says that an apology with only words is worthless. And being an adventurer, he realized that he wants to obtain precious skills. And that's precisely why he's going to deliver what he wants, asking what the boy thinks. And the protagonist says he won't complain, and thinks that it's much easier to learn a non-lethal attack skill than to put his life at risk. And he says it's a relief because he almost dishonored the gods with his actions there. And he says he's going to stop stalling and start teaching the boy right away, asking him first to try to hit him with that ridiculous shield. Wow, the guy spent his savings buying stuff, and I think he's ridiculous. I think you're lacking a little decency, you know? And the protagonist says that there are countless skills in the labyrinth, and among them, those that can be learned with just a single action are basic skills. If you wield a sword, you learn fencing, and if it's a shield, you act as a shield, and if it's a spear, you gain proficiency with the spear. And the moment you wield a weapon, you gain a skill, and as proficiency increases, your knowledge and acumen with that weapon also increase. So, basically, all players have it. And then, a skill that combines all the basic skills, even if not flashy, is one that is certainly very useful, and it's called weapons art. And even the goddess congratulated him on it. This is the skill he wants to teach him, and the protagonist doesn't seem very excited about it. And Uncel asks if he thinks that's useless. And the protagonist says that just because the skills are combined, it doesn't change anything, and says it could be different if they were main skills. And no matter how much you combine, it would be useless because of fundamental system issues. But in that, he asks how much attack the boy has now, and he says he only has 1. And so Uncel says that's a pretty lovely number, saying that his base damage should be 4. So the boy says that if it's a basic attack, it will be. And so Uncel says that this must be the shield's basic attack. And now he will attack as he said before, and Uncel activates the target lock, and will receive all attacks with fixed damage, and the protagonist notices him using a skill, since he really wants that. The boy goes up, hitting the old man in the head with a shield, and he actually receives for damage. He questions if the boy needed to hit his head. He just apologizes, and Uncel says he should attack him with his hands. Then the protagonist notices that maybe he'll be a little pissed if he hits his head again, and he goes this time with a punch in the middle of Ansel's chest, and so he only receives 2 damage. He questions whether he understood what Hem meant, and King assumes he's trying to show how much damage varies depending on the weapon he uses. And he says that's right, and the boy learns quickly, saying that because of this, adventurers use a single weapon, and for example, if he's equipped with a gauntlet plus 50 and a sword plus 20, when he attacks with the sword, only 20 attack is used, and when he attacks with the gauntlet, only 50 attack is used, and a combined damage of 70 will never occur. And so the protagonist asks if it's not obvious, because if you equip 2 weapons and combine these values, soldiers. All the players would walk around with tons of weapons, and King says that's why they use only one weapon, and increase their proficiency only in that weapon in question. Then the old man starts to get cocky, asking if this isn't bad, because thinking of only using a single type of weapon throughout combat is a very inefficient rule. Then he says that battling is something you do, risking your life, and obviously you'll be using all his body in the process. And not only his weapon, but he can also attack with his arms or charge with his shoulders. But the protagonist questions if he is because of how the damage system works. Only the weakest damage counts, questioning himself that is not the case. And Enzo says that is true, but the religious order that serves the goddess Levininith does not like that at all. And his body is a weapon, and his weapon is part of his body. And he says that when he wields it, there should be no difference, and furthermore, that after long research, he was able to develop the airhack weapon art skill, that the effects of the labyrinth are the combination of all the basic skills, and the base damage is the combination of all the equipment he is using. And the protagonist is surprised to learn that all the damage is added together, and so Enzo says that it seems he understood correctly. So if he is using the sword plus 20, gauntlets plus 50, it does not matter what he attacks with, and his damage will be 70. And the protagonist soon questions if this works with everything, and he says that it does. It doesn't just affect his weapons, but every part of his body, and even if he slaps, or shoulder charges, or fires a shot, they will all have 70 damage, and the protagonist thinks that basically every body is a weapon, and with the airhack weapon art skill, he can equip any equipment considered useless, and he remembers some people taking equipment, saying that you can't attack with a ring that has an attack, and the belt would also have it. He says that right now it might not be worth much, but as he progresses through the labyrinth and gets higher class equipment, the skill will be stolen a lot, so he thinks it's amazing, finally noticing that it has the value of a main skill. And Enzo says that maybe it's not shocking to him that he already has a resist, but for normal adventurers, it is a skill that cannot be learned, even with the effort of a lifetime, asking if the boy wants to learn. And he says right away that he wants to learn now, and when the protagonist looks at him, Enzo says that you like that he didn't even hesitate, telling him to relax his whole body, saying that this is different from all the other skills he created or learned in his entire life. However, he can transfer it to him with ease, but his proficiency is 100%, so he cannot receive it without suffering pain. And so the basic skill shield arts is combined with the weapon arts airhack, and the fencing skill was also combined with the weapon arts. And the protagonist sees all that knowledge entering his brain, saying that all kinds of skills in formation are appearing, and to think that he could receive such a stolen skill so easily. Then he receives the weapon art skill entirely from the creator himself, and he also receives the ultimate level of the airhack weapon arts, and he manages to reach 1% proficiency of the ultimate level, which is an art that unites his weapons and body, and he still has low proficiency, so there will be losses applying the power. And Enzo says that until he becomes proficient in it, he recommends training all the time without skipping a single day. And Enzo says that he will also give him something else from Noel, the faded ring with the attack +1. It is a ring that someone used for a long time, and it seems to have great value. And he says that although it will not give him full benefits and everything, it is a little weak, but it will still be of help. But the protagonist says that this is already great, because in the past he would have thrown it away as useless. But at that moment, that ring has the same value as a rusty sword. And so Enzo says that with that he's already given everything he wanted. But it's a bit embarrassing, because it's not like he can go deeper at this point. So he asks what the boy thinks about practicing with him, asking if he shouldn't test the skill before using it in practice. And the protagonist realizes that he's telling the truth, saying that he has no reason to reject it by taking his shield. And so Enzo charges at him once more with all his speed, but the boy also charges at him using the shield. And it is said that in the labyrinth his evaluation is based on all his actions. And he continues doing that friendly PvP, and he says that no matter how worthless the room is, if he searches well, finds something, his detection skill increases. Then he says that if he constantly blocks his opponent's attacks, the proficiency in the shield rod skill also increases, and besides, fighting someone so powerful has an unimaginable value. And after time, the protagonist is lying on the ground all broken, and he says that they train for the whole days. He never thought he would receive this skill, and his proficiency in battle persistence reaches 3%. He can stay in battle for a long time, and his fatigue does not increase easily. And he says that thanks to this he can fight against rank S monsters for several days in a row. He can only receive it if he fights against players, so he thought he would not get it in solo mode, but at that moment he already has it in his inventory. Then Enzo goes to him, saying that he has the sense and skill that is impossible to believe that it belongs to a first floor adventurer, and as he imagined, he has sharp eyes, asking what Tazen thinks, questioning if it was enough. enough, and the boy smiles saying yes. And so he tells him to promise to things, and he asks him to say. Then Enzo says that he also learned the skill, weapon art, and hacking, and he can teach it to someone else. But if that someone is a useless and pathetic person, he cannot teach it. And if he breaks this rule, he will personally go after him to kill him. And he says this in a very scary way, completely serious, and the protagonist agrees with him. Then Enzo says that there is something else, and if he knows something about Miss Lavinaneth, he must tell her, and the protagonist says that he has little chance of finding her again in the labyrinth. And Enzo says he didn't expect much from any one way, and he's just hoping for a miracle. But the protagonist thinks that if Enzo manages to find the goddess, whether Lavinaneth is dead or not, both Enzo and she could die there. So unless some major variable occurs before Enzo finds her, Lavinaneth will certainly be killed by someone, and he wonders whether he should say it or not, also wondering if this is some kind of crossroads. He asks if he wants to know the location of the goddess he loves, and he says that's right, because finding her is his ultimate goal. So he talks to Enzo, saying that he knows where she is. And he widens his eyes in a somewhat frightening way when he hears the protagonist say that. But when he sees the protagonist saying that he knows where his goddess is, he tells the boy not to joke about serious things. He was going to say that he's been in that labyrinth for a long time, but he's never been able to find her, so he should tell him how someone who just entered knew where she is, and the protagonist notes that he doesn't believe him, and he can't even judge that, but he already knows what he was doing, asking him to trust him, saying that his world has an item that is connected to the labyrinth, and so he says it's a lie, because the labyrinth doesn't have any map, but he says that it's not a map connected to the labyrinth, but a map connected to a special existence. And so he starts to believe a little more, saying that it's impossible, thinking that it must be God's call, asking if that item was in his world, and the boy says yes, saying that it's an item that can be acquired in a labyrinth that tells the location of a god, and his family has information about it, and it has also memorized the location of all the gods that were inscribed on it. But apparently the protagonist thinks it's a lie, isn't it? And Taeyong showed him in the past life about that item, and asked him to be careful, because no one should know about it. She says that it's an item she got on the 89th floor, but it has no use whatsoever, because the gods are horrible, and only they were laughing at her. And so he notices that she is complaining again, and he says that he thought it was just useless information for that moment, but now he will use it. And he says that on the 78th floor, in everyone's library, in the 24th secret room, the goddess Lavinaneth is there. And so Enzo is surprised by what the boy said and the details he gave, because the library was really there, but he still hasn't checked anything yet. And he thinks that she must be there. The boy says that with that they are even, but he runs to him saying that they are more than even, thanking him very much, because he has never been so grateful for someone in his life, and says that now he is indebted to him while he gets super nervous and euphoric. Then the protagonist says that he is hurting him with that tightness of that level, and so he says that it was bad because he couldn't hold himself back. Then the protagonist asks if he's thinking about going now, but Enzo says it's going to be difficult because the 78th floor is very deep. It's a strange place even for him, so he needs to prepare himself properly beforehand. And he swears he doesn't know how to thank him, and it's hard to even think of saying something, and says he needs to reward him for that. But then he gives a bronze ring with 20 more health to the protagonist, saying that it will help him a lot, and saying that it looks like a ring used by a priest, and the religion of the former owner of that ring has already been extinguished, with only its former owner as a believer. And so the protagonist is surprised, because he would only get something like that up there on a 30th floor, so Enzo says that normally he wouldn't have given this to an adventurer who's only on the first floor. But he thinks that the protagonist is not a lazy man, and he hopes not to regret his guess. And the protagonist says he doesn't have time to stand still, so he shouldn't worry. And so Enzo says that's good, saying he'll get ready. And the protagonist asks if he's going there, and he says he finally has a clue as to where he is, saying he can't waste time, thanking Tayson, hoping to see her again. And so he runs off all happy, telling his goddess that he's arriving. The last one left is going, and he starts laughing as he leaves. And the protagonist wonders if he'll be able to find the goddess, and if he does, will she still be alive, or will she already be dead, bringing total despair to the old man's life. And he says that anyway, in any case, he won't see him anytime soon, so he continues exploring the labyrinth, because after spending a little time on the first floor, his dexterity is 25, so catching a big rat is quite easy, and he activates his soul quality ability, and the difference in soul quality between him and his target is very high, and he is surprised by this, because he cannot acquire anything from the target, and the protagonist finally realizes that if the difference is too great, at some point it will stop having an effect, and it is. Sad, however, he was already expecting this, because he thinks he has already evolved as much as he could there on the first floor, and it is time for him to go to the second. But before that, he needs to go somewhere, because inside that maze there are some secret rooms, and then he will have a completely locked room. And he says that each floor has one, and inside it there are great rewards for whoever finds them. First, magic staffs, ring of levitation, and various other things like potions of permanent increase in attributes, and so on. And they give a great advantage to those who are venturing through the maze. And only one person can enter the secret room, and that is why the competition to enter these rooms in easy mode was fierce. And he says that because of this, he didn't enter several of them. And that's why most people get out of the maze by luck rather than skill, but there is solo mode. And in that place, he will enter all the secret rooms. And while he is inside, he wonders if their structure will be the same, because of course, the maze map changes according to the difficulty, but the general structure is the same. So all the secret rooms have some things in common, and he notices that he is inside there, noticing that it is just an entrance, and inside it there is nothing. It is an unimportant room and ignored by several players. But in secret rooms, there is a place like this for that. And he goes touching every corner of the wall because common bricks without any different properties are there. And to find out where that room is very simple. He just needs to go touching all the bricks until he finds the right one, and he thinks it will take a while, and he follows a routine of pressing, taking off and putting on. And if it's not this one, he goes to the next one. And if it's not that one, he goes to another. And he thinks how funny it is, because compared to the room where he couldn't do anything but survive, this is pretty calm. And so his proficiency with detecting begins to increase until he manages to find the secret room and is the first to discover it, also acquiring the title of adventurer, and his intelligence permanently increases by another 3. Then the chest in the secret room is in front of him, and he says that it looks like he can grab it and run, but there's no way it's just that. He starts looking around, very suspicious, and sees a giant rat there. But Hugh whistles on the floors and grabs the rat by the tail, then takes it and throws it forward, throwing it in the middle of the room. And when it falls on one of the stones, it activates a trap, and this trap launches an arrow directly at the rat, and he notices that they are arrow traps, but also thinks that this was expected, because for the level he is at, it doesn't seem to be a difficult trap to set either. And so he walks calmly and ends up stepping on a trap, but stops the arrow only with his hands. And he says that now he is abnormally strong for most of the players on the first floor, so he can do it again if he concentrates. And he thinks he only has 7 arrows and activates all of them, stopping the arrows very calmly. And he says he will get some from there, and the boy goes forward, stopping all of them and activating every possible trap. But as he goes, he notices that it is getting harder. He can no longer catch them and just needs to dodge. And since for him it is a waste, he is collecting all the arrows until he takes a poison arrow with attack +2, and also the paralyzing arrow that paralyzes the target with attack +2, but it can fail depending on the target's attribute or level. He notices that those two are different and thinks it's good for him, wondering if he should go to the first trap again. He keeps doing this to farm free arrows. He thinks he's exploring that room with a slight risk, but it's worth taking that risk. Then he notices that he has 100 arrows, and for him that's already good enough. He says it's time to go after the main dish of the night. He goes straight to the chest, jumping and throwing himself near it. He says that if he were to advance again, he would just have to block the arrows with a shield and run. But that's the maze, and he needs to do everything carefully. The arrows keep coming, and he breaks and deflects some of them. So he notices that that's the 5th and last one, and thinks that the next one is the 9th brick. And several arrows come all together towards him, Prota, and he says that there are 9 arrows that will be shot at him. So he activates the skill by a thread, which allows him to hold his breath for 10 seconds. So his proficiency in clear vision increases to 2%. And he says that there are 3 coming from the front and 2 from the left, besides that there are 3 behind and 1 behind, and it will be difficult for him to dodge them all. So he starts to expand his senses during the dangerous situation and obtains the conditional activation skill, sensory enhancement, so he deflects 1 of them, and there are only 8 left. And he gets rid of 3 more, leaving 5, and so 1 comes in the middle of his chest. But he also manages to deflect it, using his skill, and with that the arrow passes directly through him, with him receiving only 8 damage, and there are 4 arrows left now, and he says he can withstand that much damage, and because he ignored that arrow with a skill, he has more freedom to move this time, and says that the trajectory of the remaining arrows is the same, so he takes 1 of them and stops the other 3, and so he clicks on the last trap, and taking everything as standard now, there should be 10 arrows, but the number is greater than he expected, and now there are 15, and so he goes back and tries to block them in every way, but thinks that it is more than he expected, and he cannot block them all at once, and says that with the increase in the arrow, he also has an increase in arrows with the same trajectory, and if he doesn't dodge them, he'll get hit with 2 of them, cracking his arm. He takes 16 damage along with 15, and he takes more and more damage, becoming weakened. and he starts to bleed and will suffer from constant loss of life, so he thinks that it hurts too much. Removing the arrow from his arm, and it is said that he experienced great pain and obtains the ability of continued conditional activation. Reduce pain, and he thinks that it is hurting less because of the ability, but it is still hurting because of the low proficiency. And if he had not experienced this many times before, he would possibly have fainted, because now he is only at 50 for life of the 140 he has. And he thinks that since he gained an ability for having blood a lot and become weakened, he thinks he no longer needs to take free damage. So he goes there clicking and turning off the traps. Then they are all collected, and he says that the traps must have been deactivated, and now it is time for the reward, opening that chest and getting a crafted staff. But he is surprised to have already won a staff, because in hard mode, it appeared on the 10th floor, but in solo mode it appears directly on the 1st floor, making him wonder if that is a fake staff. But that is a fire staff, a staff used by magic apprentices can use the basic magic, fireball, and he is surprised that it is real, because that is a fire staff, which is much more powerful than the other staffs at the beginning, and he is surprised that this is what you can receive at the beginning of solo mode. And he remembers Lee Taeyong because he couldn't find the secret room, so he doesn't know if he is okay or not, but he thinks that based on his current state, he will possibly be much better in the future. So he goes back to hunting some rats, but they are no longer a threat to the boy because he can get out of their way easily. And even though he currently can't use one of his arms, thanks to the big difference in attributes, he no longer has a problem with those shitty rats. And the rat is getting nervous in front of the protagonist, and the system says that even in the weakened state, he has no problems moving, and he obtains skill, unbreakable willpower. And he finds this incredible. He finally kills a rat and also defeats the big rat. And when he arrives again in that safe area, he drinks some water to heal himself, recovering and staying in the normal state. Then he will look at the skills he gained, and the reduced pain makes him immune to pain, but not in his senses. And the auxiliary improvement improves his senses, and sometimes he can feel murderous intentions. And he says that these are the very good skills, although they have no use at that moment, and if he increases their proficiency, they will improve exponentially. He also gains unbreakable willpower, and even with any and all types of injuries, his fighting spirit cannot be stopped, and while he is in combat, he can ignore all injuries for 10 seconds. And he thinks that this is a skill that ignores any and all types of injuries. And he also thinks that the duel was more worthwhile, and he also gets the title of Magic Apprentice, and gets the Fireball and the use of Main 3, and his proficiency is at 1%. And as he imagined, that staff is his greatest gain, which can generate a Fireball, which causes a lot of damage to the target, which is no resistance whatsoever, and the target will undergo a check to see if the burn effect has been applied. He imagines that he has achieved everything he could on the 1st floor, and it's time to go to the 2nd. So he says that the structure of the maze is simple, and the stairs that lead to the next floor are protected by a boss, and players need to defeat him to continue. And he goes to the boss room because it would be nice if defeating the boss was simple with the maze structure, but there is no easy way in solo mode. And when he opens the door, he sees a giant rat, a really giant one this time, that is ready to go after him. And he thinks that it has been a long time since he saw that big rat, and the giant rat starts to want to attack the same moment he enters. And he is surprised that this is the one they have as the boss of the 1st floor. And he says that this was the boss of the 10th floor, and he asks how many players were killed by those claws of that rat. Then he sees that monster going up and thinks that he won't be surprised after everything he has been through, so he says that that shitty rat can go up. And the protagonist says that the giant rat is a monster that a mere player on the 1st floor cannot defeat, and so Lee Taeyong used a loophole, and she was scared to death, but she still managed to win because she used the fact that the boss of the labyrinth cannot leave there, and she stood on the edge of the door entrance, behind the barrier, watching him struggle on the other side, and so she filled the rat's room with oil and set the fire, a viable method with no time to waste. He says that considering she was the only solo player who survived, he thinks he should do it, but this isn't the fight the labyrinth wants. So he summons his staff, wanting to go all out with fire, and the gigantic rat goes all out on the boy, and he activates the fireball ability for the first time, and he says that only after going through a tough battle, he can become stronger, and so the rat takes 14 damage with that fireball. Then the system starts using the check. Then the check is completed, and the rat starts to burn, and the boy is happy about this, because the burning status causes 1 damage for 10 seconds, but it's still not enough, and so he starts pulling out his bow, an arrow, dealing another 7 damage to the bow, and also poisoning it. And so it's burning and also poison, and he says it doesn't matter, he'll just try until it works, launching another arrow now, an electric arrow, and it is paralyzed. And with that, the target won't be able to move for 10 seconds, or when attacked. And he says that these status conditions are good for their price, and so he says it's time to start the really good part, because fire and paralysis. And now he can't move. So he deals more and more damage with those arrows and keeps checking the poison status. And the rat is actually taking poison damage, and he says that now it's another arrow with the status applied, so he can continue accumulating damage. And the rat is suffering in every way, all spiky like a porcupine. And finally, the protagonist takes a shield and says that this is more than a massacre. It's almost a declaration of death for the rat, and the rat, which is incapacitated, starts taking more damage, with the protagonist giving a shield blow there, which takes 13 damage at once. But in this, the rat becomes completely powerless and enters the berserker state, but he says that there is a limit to what he's doing. And so the protagonist notices that his life is getting close to the end. He wonders if it's time, and so the rat picks up one of the corpses that is there and starts to rise in front of the protagonist, and he says that when his life drops to 20%, he enters berserker mode. And everyone who was with the protagonist at that moment noticed that the paralysis didn't work and started asking to be saved, but the rat continued eating people, and the boy from the past was in disbelief because they wouldn't be able to escape, saying that he is faster and they will be destroyed. And at that moment, the rat showed why he is the boss. But currently, even with the rat entering berserker mode, the protagonist is very calm with his face there because now the fight has begun, and the rat starts at an even greater speed, attacking the protagonist with everything. But he manages to hold it with his shield very calmly, receiving only 8 damage. He says that as he thought, it is too much for his current strength, and the rat tries to attack him again. And he says that his current strength attribute is only 2. However, will use his greatest attribute, dexterity, to end his life. And he attacks the rat once more, hitting one of its paws with everything, and the rat almost goes out of berserker mode, making a face of astonishment with that damage. And so, with his paw stuck in the ground, he tries to pull it out, but while he is trying to get his claws off the ground, the protagonist goes after him again, now dealing 7 damage, and the rat gets more and more nervous, attacking the protagonist, who even defending with the shield, still takes 5 damage, but he attacks back, dealing 7 damage to the rat, and thus, his proficiency in battle persistence begins to increase, adding 1 more. And the rat tries to bite him again, and he says he is running out of energy. He won't be able to hold out much longer if he keeps like this, so this time, he goes after him with a sword, and he activates the attack by a thread, and he can go without breathing for 10 seconds, and he continues attacking in every way, and the rat takes more and more damage, adding 8 this time, and 7 more. However, the rat manages to deflect the damage, hitting the protagonist in the counterattack, dealing 20 for damage. So he thinks that with that amount, he can take few hits, and he thinks that if he uses resist or deflect, he can take 8 attacks, and he continues taking damage, while trying to do the best he can against the rat, and he activates deflect, and so the next attack he will receive will not be effective, and the protagonist says he will end this before the 8th hit, going all out on the rat. So he decides this time to get out of the way, and he manages to counterattack successfully, and so the target will take much more damage in the next lunge, and he hits right in the monster's chest and goes straight to the head, and with that, he takes 20 damage, and the rat starts to scream, but he no longer has enough health and ends up falling behind of the protagonist, and he wins the battle against the gigantic rat. And he thinks it was easier than he thought, making a crazy nonsense because he was almost dying. But then, he wonders where his reward is, and the system throws everything at him because he defeats the powerful enemy alone, and his dexterity also permanently increases by 2, and his mana also permanently increases by another 3, and he activates a soul skill, increasing soul quality, and his strength permanently increases by 2, and his dexterity increases by 3, and the protagonist ends up leveling up, fully recovering, and he says he already expected this, but he is certainly happy. And since he successfully defeated a boss on the first floor, he acquired the standard reward, a random attribute increase potion, and he found the secret room on the first floor, acquiring the standard reward to targeted attribute increase potions. And then he thinks that it is only difficult to get even after the 50th floor, and he activates the random attribute increase potion, also using the targeted attribute increase potion, and thanks to the effect of the random potion, his strength permanently increases by another 1, and he says that clearly he will increase his strength with the targeted potion, and says that it increased by 3 in an instant, and that is very good for him. Then he sees that his strength has reached 17, intelligence 16, and dexterity is at 30. These are his attributes on the first floor, and he did everything to increase his attributes in easy mode. So he ends up noticing that he gained another ability, which is the counterattack. And the use of mana is 5, and his proficiency it's at 1%. And the counterattack causes great damage to its target when the enemy attacks. And so he notices that he gained it earlier than expected, as it is an ability as useful as F-leashes. And so he says that he has already seen everything, questioning what happens now. And he starts sending messages to the others, saying that the basic method to complete the first floor is to say that he has already posted the article in the community, and so he has no expectations, but it might help. And while he finishes writing, he notices that someone said something, and he sees messages from people wanting the path to the spring of life because they need to see it soon. But another guy says he can't help him because the location is different for everyone, so he needs to talk to the merchant. And Taeyong tells them that they will be safe if they go to the spring of life, so they should go there as soon as possible because it will become increasingly difficult to continue where they are now. And one of them says that there is an entire species against their extinction. That's funny. And the other says that they are still lucky because they still has a chance to live, saying that it is better than dying without having done anything. And the protagonist gets curious reading this, and someone thanks him saying that he has reached the spring of life, thanking everyone for their help. And Kang Jong-hyuk says that if the boy is careful from now on, he will not die on the first floor. And the protagonist says that the community is completely different from before he returned, because back then people barely used it. And when they did, many were dying. And he says that no one talked about how they completed a floor, and there were only messages of despair, with some people going hungry and also in a deplorable situation, and they say they do not want to die of hunger there, but they ask if there is any reason to continue living because they do not want this anymore. And he says that as time went by, perhaps out of desperation, no one talked anymore. And then Lee Taeyong asked if there was anyone in the chat because she was the only one left, and currently she asks about the protagonist, asking where he went because she has not seen him since he posted that. And the protagonist notices that now the story is different, and so after paying close attention to the community, he prepares to go to the next floor and says that it's time to go there. And so he uses the fighter's glove that protects the sisters and can cause damage if he hits enemies with it. And the king who sells the shop is surprised that he is going to buy that, asking if he uses his fist, but in doing so, he ends up noticing that that old man taught him the weapons arts of Aiheki, and he asks if he knows him. And the king says that they are the only ones who wrought there, so he knows him very well. And besides, he asked if he is going to sell the meat, saying that if he killed the boss, he probably must have gotten the leather and even his teeth. But the protagonist tells him that he won't sell it because he'll need it eventually, and he says he understands what he meant and asks if he'll use them with the blacksmith. And the boy apparently has that idea, and he talks about the labyrinth's blacksmith, Harfang, and he remembers that Litaean said that if it weren't for him, she wouldn't have advanced to the deeper floors, and he remembers that she said she would find him on a floor further ahead, so he needs to hurry because there is a place a little far from the labyrinth's entrance. And he says that it is a place where what was killed can be revived, and the beings there are not so powerful, but he arrived and is on the second floor, and he must defeat the second floor boss to be able to advance. And the reward is the low-grade mana increasing potion. And the secret reward is not established, and he is surprised with this enlargement potion because it's not a rare potion that isn't even sold in the store, and he's eager to complete that floor. But he receives a lot of unread messages, and so he's surprised and asked what's wrong. And Jin Hiroki asked if he's there, and several people send him messages left and right. He questions which one should answer first, and in that Jin Hiroki whispers to him, and he says it's the right time. And so the boy is surprised that he was right, saying that he really can't talk there. And the protagonist asks what's wrong, and the boy says it's nothing, saying that he just went to see how the guy is his savior. And the protagonist questions why he doesn't worry about himself first, and says that to be honest, he didn't expect that those people who are being so pushed to the limit while they are trapped in that unknown world would contact him just because of the article he posted in the community. And he says that although it's not his place to speak, he asked if he read the article he posted and went straight to it, and he says yes, saying that everyone was on edge, and he just wanted to hold on to some spark of hope. And he says that it gives him chills just remembering that, and he thanks his Hyuga very much for having written that article, and the protagonist says it was nothing. Then the boy says that he knows very well that there is no food if you don't enter the labyrinth. And no one in the labyrinth had talked about it, and he was getting hungrier and hungrier, and he wonders why people don't eat their limbs in extreme situations. And he also had no one to talk to. He was in the perfect situation to have an outburst, and the boy went back to the doorman, asking if he didn't have any food to give him, asking him not to ignore him. And he says he had to run to the labyrinth in search of finding something to eat, until the protagonist sent a message there, and he says that in that situation, he is surprised because there was a method to complete the first floor. And he says that although he didn't think about it, at that time the article, it was extremely useful. And when they read it, he and Taeyong were able to complete it after the others. And the protagonist notes that this was why, because Lee Taeyong also used to complain a lot in the community, but since she managed to complete it, the others thought they would be able to too. And he asks how many people can kill a big rat, and the boy says that currently only he and Taeyong. And the protagonist says that he already expected Taeyong, but it was the first time he heard something good from that guy, and he thinks he hadn't met him before because he must have died in the labyrinth while fighting to survive. And And since he managed to hunt a big rat, his talent must probably be on the same level as Taeyong, and he is surprised. Because who would have thought that a guy would survive because of his article? Basically, you're writing a walkthrough on how to survive in another world. If you don't think you're going to save someone with that, you're a real idiot. The protagonist says he's going to find an old NPC who's looking for his goddess, and he's going to attack him mercilessly. He says the boy should respond accordingly, because he'll get something really good if he does. He says the way he treats any NPC changes depending on their actions, so the boy should be careful. He tells him to tell Lee Taeyong when he wakes up. The boy asks if the protagonist is okay, and he questions what he's talking about, and he says he's giving him everything on a silver platter. He thanks him for his help, but says they're going through the same things and technically they're adversaries. Of course, although he's weaker than him now, if he keeps doing this, he might get stronger than him quickly, but that doesn't mean he'll try to do anything against the protagonist, and he cannot accept all of this without having to reciprocate. And the protagonist says he's wondering how far he wanted to go, and so the boy asks him to take him seriously. But in doing so, he questions whether the boy is an adversary, saying that they are all human and came from the same place, and there is only one reason for him to tell him all this. So he tells him to advance in the labyrinth and see if he doesn't die. He asks the boy if he realizes that many people died after reading his steps on how to advance on the first floor, and tells the boy not to forget that there is no point in knowing something if you don't know how to apply it, and asks if he really thinks he will be able to pass only with the things he told him. Then he says that he still hasn't managed to complete the first floor, so he's kind of extrapolating by saying this. And King says that it's good that he knows, and now the boy must give his all. While he stays behind, he wonders if he did well back then, remembering his past, and so he asks how the community is. And the boy says that it's normal, but people in other modes are talking about them. However, they are trying to pick a fight with them, and he is even trying to ignore them, but he doesn't know how long he will be able to. And the protagonist notices that people who don't know their places are starting to appear, so he just says he understands, wishing the boy good luck, and he also wishes good luck to the protagonist. And so he arrives on the second floor of solo mode, and says that until now the first floor was just a tutorial, and they say that it is from the second floor that the labyrinth begins. And so he arrives in a room with several goblins already kicking the door in the biggest bravado of nothing, and then a goblin archer, swordsman, and squire appear in front of him shouting to the protagonist. So he calls all of them to go up, already taking his bow, and he talks a little about goblins, which are easy to kill when they are alone, but thanks to their overwhelmed intelligence, they become a problem when they are in a group. And the protagonist deals 10 damage hitting the chest of one of the goblins, but the other manages to stop the attacks arrows by putting his arm in front, and the third one manages to stop them just using his shield. And they go after the protagonist, who also defends himself with his shield. He says that they have tried everything, but they are bad, telling him to try to block now with that shitty shield face to face, crushing one of them directly to the ground, and the goblin takes 3 damage, but ends up crushed there, receiving another 4. And the protagonist pulls out one of his daggers, but before he can kill that goblin, he starts screaming, and the protagonist says that he has no reason to do that. But in that, other goblins join in while the protagonist is killing that one, and they go all out for the boy. And the protagonist realizes that it is going badly, but ends up seeing that one of them has a very imposing sword, and it is a long sword, and he says that this is a great gift, thanking him. And so he now pulls out his fire staff and pulls out a fireball, killing everyone who was there. And after all this, he gets the slightly rusty sword with attack +2. And it is said that if it is used in a decent way, it will fulfill its role. And he thinks it is much better, because that combo is much better than the one with the tower shield. And he also gets the wooden shield, which gives him defense +2. It is not that big, and can block most attacks, but it seems that it will break if hit hard, so he goes to another room, opening another door, and inside he feels a red snow, and he ends up discovering the altar of Lycuridas that looks like a fountain with blood there. And he gets the first discover bonus, and his intelligence permanently increases by 1, and his mana also increases by 2, and he says that the gods of the labyrinth have several personalities, and that one there is quite macabre. He says that there are some friendly ones, but others that are dangerous to the players, and some that look at them with disdain, and others that look at them with sympathy. But most of the gods treat the players as toys, and he remembers that Lycuridas is the god of conflict and death. Observing that skull in front of him, he says that he can feel it, and besides, it has a power more powerful and heavy than anything else, and that is an altar created for the worshippers of Lycuridas, a path that connects with the god Lycuridas that can influence the world with that place. And so he says who understood why Litaean ran as soon as he saw this, and looking at Symbolist, he questions if that is a god, and receives a secondary mission, because Lycuridas says he wants Litaestar because he was the 1. Who found his altar? And if he accepts, he will be tested. And if he passes, he will receive a reward. And the reward decided by Lycurgus depends on his performance. But the protagonist thinks he is not a coward and accepts that challenge, and the secondary mission begins. And Lycurgus appreciates his decision. And then something begins to form in front of the protagonist. And from there comes a knight's armor standing, being covered by all that red miasma. And thus a complete knight is formed in front of the protagonist, and a very imposing one at that. And that is Lycurgus' servant. But it is fake. And he is well equipped with a very imposing sword prepared to fight the protagonist. And the test is to face that servant and be victorious. And the protagonist thinks about that armor because it is covering his whole body, so it's going to be hard to find an opening. But looking closely at that thing, he thinks this guy is very strong. And so the servant goes all out on the kid, attacking from top to bottom. And then the protagonist can only defend himself with a shield for a very short time, but still takes 25 damage. And he says he took all of that even while blocking, so there's no reason for him to use the shield. And so he undoes the shield and picks up another weapon in its place, keeping the slightly rusty sword along with the rusty sword in his hand. And he says that now it's time to use dual wielding. My friend, get that crazy guy's sword and become the Santorio of this Manhwa. I just want to see. And stopping to think, if he puts 3 swords with absurd attacks, he will become very strong. Because if he equips them, the attack adds up. So for me, he should be like a Christmas tree with every possible weapon. And he goes up against that armor again. And she defends herself with her sword. But the protagonist, even with 2 of them, can't do much. So he throws it back a little and starts attacking several points, each one with his hand, but he thinks it's not working because the knight is in a pose that doesn't leave any openings. He thinks that he is much stronger than him, and there is no reason to face him head on, and so he jumps back thinking he's going to start running away. Then running, the knight comes behind, but in that he turns around quickly and decides to attack head to head, saying that his dexterity is greater, and so he puts pressure on that knight. And Lycurgus' servant finally takes 6 damage, and so continues taking the same amount of damage in a row, and the protagonist thinks that the sword is stuck when he stuck it in that monster. But he's really screwed now. But even so, he has other ways to attack and starts punching that monster, and he says that he has Eriki's weapon art, so he just needs to use it to the fullest until he can't anymore. And so face to face, he will punch the knight while waiting with him to undermine the monster's life at once. And he says that he has used this technique several times before, but now it is being very useful, and so Lycurgus feels a little surprised by the way the boy fights, and so his servant steps back a little, and the protagonist thinks that it is easier than he had imagined, and says that he is still on the 2nd floor, so it must be at the floor level. And since he is the god of conflict and death, he's probably fighting with all his might, but that's kind of sad. But the system says that Lycurgus manifests its authority, and in exchange its range of influence will decrease, and the protagonist realizes that something is happening around him, and the system says that Lycurgus' servant has recovered its intelligence and also recovers its techniques, and the protagonist realizes that things have gotten really bad because he's even more summoned and starts looking at him with a very lively look, and just with that look, everything he had to lock in the protagonist locked this time, and now he's no longer against the false servant and finds the true servant of Lycurgus. And with that, the pressure increases a lot in that confrontation, and the servant pulls the protagonist's sword that was stuck in his belly and simply takes it and throws it towards the protagonist. And the boy notices that he no longer has the false mark, and the atmosphere around him is completely different, and he goes down to get that sword. And he says that since he has intelligence, the methods he used will no longer work, and so the servant goes all out at an absurd speed, surprising the protagonist and almost hitting him, and so he begins to use even more ferocious techniques, and the protagonist needs to give everything he has to stop his sword. But even holding it with both hands, he is forced to kneel, taking 13 and 11 damage, even without being hit, and he wonders what the hell is this, because his movement is completely different, and the servant starts to throw the protagonist back and run after him while he attacks, and he takes 20 damage as he slams his back against the wall with everything. And Kang notices that he is using clean movement without wasting a single movement, and this is the fencing of a knight who has received good training, and says that it is his first time facing something like this. And although he has many weapons in his hand, he can't control them, and he wonders if this is what happens when you have a gigantic difference in skill. And he says he wants to learn this, and all his actions are evaluated in the labyrinth, and if he reaches a certain score, he will receive a title or skill, and this is probably a rank skill. And the boy goes into an absurd frenzy, and his gaze begins to scare that knight because he is in a totally zone mode, and then he concentrates as hard as he can, thinking he wants to learn that skill, and says that the knight is better with the sword than he is, and he admits it. But he says he's a player and pulls out his staff, saying that sword is not the only thing he can use, so he throws fire at the knight. But he manages to cut the fireball quickly, however, The protagonist has already fled from his front, and when he looks, the protagonist appears behind him and starts attacking, dealing 6 damage to that armor. The servant turns quickly to try to hit the protagonist, however. He says there is no point in doing that because he activates the deflect, and the attack does not hit him, but even so, it does 15 damage. And the boy activates his attack by a thread to be able to counterattack, dealing 6 and 5 damage, but receives 11 as well, and deals another 6 more, and the system says that he attacked his target without stopping. He received a continuous conditional activation ability, consecutive attacks, and the protagonist thanks him for the ability, but tells that knight to disappear from his front, activating the fireball and managing to hit him directly in the head. He receives 13 damage in the burning status, and he wonders when he will die, as his mana is starting to run out, and he only has 5 mana and 70 health left. So if this fight continues, he will be at a complete disadvantage. But he says there is no reason to run from this, going after the knight, so he simply puts both swords behind him and prepares to stab the knight with them. But he ends up being hit, however. While taking 80 damage, he begins to resist, and thus his killing attack is nullified, so he uses this to launch another attack. And the system says that all damage received will be reduced to 0 for 1 second. And he manages to plunge his sword into that knight right in the middle of his neck, and with that, he manages to tear off the knight's head, leaving him completely disarmed. And when the head flies off, the protagonist falls to the ground with that damage received, and the knight's flying head reveals that there was someone underneath and says that it was a beautiful fight, talking to that brave player, and thus, he defeats the servant of Laricata's, and it is said that Laricata's himself is satisfied with this, and the protagonist falls to the ground completely exhausted, saying that he's going to hell with the satisfied guy, asking how he has the audacity to change the mission conditions out of nowhere, asking if Laricata's is messing around, and so, since he won, he receives a huge amount of XP and levels up, fully recovering, and since he defeated a powerful enemy alone, he activates the soul quality increased skill, and the protagonist wonders how strong he became by opening the status window, and all the stats increase greatly, and he gets a total of 17 increase, in addition to 30 increase in health, and also in mana, and he says that this is too much, asking if he won any item, because it will be sad if he didn't, and then, since he passed Laricata's test, he will receive a reward depending on the god's evaluation, and so, as he is very satisfied with his fight, that god wants to give him a reward at the level, so he tells him to stop making sweet hollows, telling him to give it to him right away because he almost died, and then it is said that Lycuridas' range decreases, and the protagonist receives something, and so he receives the ceremonial sword of Lycuridas, and the sword gives 5 more attack, and recovers 5 health when killing an enemy, and that one there is almost one of Song's daggers, and it is said that this is a sword used by all Lycuridas worshippers, and this sword was painted red to represent the blood of their enemies, and protagonist questions himself if he read wrong, wondering if he can really handle such a thing, and in disbelief that this is something that can actually exist on the 2nd floor, and he passes the test empowered, and an additional reward will be given to him, and he notices that he is rewarding him because he suffered too much, and he receives a continuous ability with conditional activation, combat test, and the ability says that he has proven himself to be someone of courage, and he will become stronger with each victory he has in combat, and the proficiency is at 1%, and he notices that it is a buff type, and says that since it was given by a god, it must be good, but in this, the whole place ends up starting to collapse, but he asks if it is not over yet, asking what is there, and so he looks ahead, noticing that Lycuridas offers him an apostle contract, and the protagonist is surprised by this. Then the protagonist, seeing that contract, wonders what it is, because there is nothing else explaining what it is, and he questions whether he has to choose what he wants now, and then he observes closely, but in doing so, he notices that at that moment, something happened while the protagonist was fighting, and the servant gained intelligence, and he says that apparently the gods suffer penalties when they want to influence a player, and Lycuridas seems to want to make him his disciple, even suffering some penalties, but even if he takes this as a positive action, it is still a god doing this, and so he increased the difficulty as he wanted, and still established chaos, and accepting the offer of such a being will probably not be a gain for him, so he will end up becoming a puppet, and perhaps he can be used as a toy or slave by the god for all eternity, so he thinks he will not accept, refusing that, and it is said that the apostle's contract was postponed, and he says that it is good that he did not get angry when he refused, but then he realizes something, because Lycuridas gave a secondary mission because he wants him, who completed the last test with mastery, to perform another test, and the condition is to kill the enemies on the 2nd and 3rd floors and return there, and the reward will be decided by Lycuridas based on his performance, but the protagonist says he doesn't want to, asking how he will trust someone who deceived him once, so he refuses that mission, but Lycuridas sends the mission again, saying that the reward was decided based on his performance, and the protagonist gets angry, saying that he probably can't refuse a mission like that, So he accepts that mission, and Lycurgus smiles at the protagonist and is told that he is delighted with his decision. And so the protagonist returns to the salesman king, and he is surprised that the boy has already returned, and he says that he has to buy some things. And he questions if he went to buy potions, but asks why buy so soon, and he thinks he will need it. And so the protagonist says that although he didn't plan on buying them in the initial floors, he might suffer a bit if he has another test like that. But while the boy is thinking, the old man ends up lifting the sword at his waist, and he notices that that sword belongs to Lycurgus, asking if he got it from that idiot, because it seems like he's using him to squander himself. And Kang asked if the old man knows him, and he says of course, asking how he wouldn't know, because it wasn't just one or two who died because of that angry god. And he continues to do whatever he wants while carving out his territory. And the protagonist notices that Lycurgus has been doing this for a while, and he asks if he can ask him something, asking what an apostle contract is, and the king is surprised that Lycurgus should be an apostle contract, and the boy says that he offered, but he refused, because it didn't explain anything, and the king says it was a good choice, because it's not something you can decide without thinking, and that guy's contract, so how long has it been? But he thinks he can't answer, apologizing to the protagonist, changing nothing, and he says that the only thing he can be for him is a merchant, and he can't do anything other than what was said in his contract. And the protagonist questions about this contract, and he says that's the reason he's stuck there, and getting angry with the boy, saying that if he's already taken everything, he should disappear from there, and the protagonist just leaves. And the old man says that if he goes to see him, he should see him on another floor. So, as he returns to the labyrinth, he thinks it's time for the meeting and goes to the chat talking to the young Taeyeon, and another boy also appears, and he asks if they found the paladin, and he says yes. But he was different from what he told him, and the protagonist doesn't quite believe it, questioning how so. So, the boy ended up being spat out by the old man because that paladin just hit him and escaped. So he asked if he didn't block him, and the boy says how is he going to block something of that level, because even if he wanted to react, his body couldn't keep up. He was just completely suppressed, and it ended like that. And she says she also saw him, but it was the same thing, and she couldn't do anything. And the protagonist then questions what they did next, asking if they ran after him, and he says of course they did, but he just told them to get out of his way, saying he has no value. And the protagonist notices that he only recognizes people who respond to his attacks, but thinks about it, that it's the same thing with the dwarves, and also with the Lycurgus. He asks where the two are now, and tells her that they are hunting big rats, while the girl says she wants to level up before advancing, and she continues, killing them with a shield, still quite scared, and asks her about the others, and tells them that some people have started hunting big rats now, but they think it will take a while to be able to kill one. And the protagonist begins to notice that they are still trying to adapt to the world, and he begins to notice that it is better to give them some information about the second floor later, and tells them to pay attention, saying that before going to the second floor, there's a boss monster and a giant rat, a larger version of the big rat, and its health is over 100. And even if they block any of its attacks, they will still take damage, so they must be careful. And the two are scared, asking how they will kill something of that level, and the protagonist tells them to think carefully, saying that he cannot say everything, saying that they will be able to think of something if they spend time on it. And he tells them to tell the other players to, so that they do not die. And so, the two thank the protagonist a lot, wishing the boy good luck. And so, the protagonist says that he said everything he wanted, so he thinks he needs to start the mission. So he accepts Lycurgus' request and goes to the other floor, now beating his shield and his sword to be able to draw the attention of the golems. And they come out of the burrows where they were preparing to throw themselves on top of the boy, and they all surround him. And so, Kanki says he will test his new skills, activating the combat test, passing through all of them and killing them very calmly, finishing off several of them one after the other. And he says that his mind is empty, and this reduces his mental stress, so it is very good and increases his attributes, and even heals him. And he says that there is no restriction or limit from what he saw, so if his conditions remain, he can fight forever, and thinks this is cool because depending on the situation, it could be his main skill. So he starts making a mess on that side of the golems, even killing a pretty beefy one of them. Then he notices something strange, wondering if there was a door like that in the labyrinth, and from inside the door, he ends up seeing something he didn't expect, similar to a tomb, and he finds the warrior's grave. He is surprised seeing that place, and thus he gains the bonus of first to discover. His intelligence increases by 1 and his mana by 2. Then he touches that grave, and ends up that a pyrotechnic happens right above him, and thus a spirit appears, saying hello to that adventurer. Then, simply, when the protagonist talks to him, he leaves saying goodbye. He doesn't understand anything about it and touches the grave again, and so he says it was good to recognize and returns to the grave once more, and the protagonist gets irritated, touching the grave again, and the spirit comes out asking what he is doing, telling the protagonist to leave. But the boy simply grabs the spirit by the neck, and in the greatest ignorance possible, then tells him to stop with that shit and deal with the mission. And the spirit questions if he is telling him to deal with the mission, asking if he knows who he is, and so he questions that maybe he is a dead warrior, and he says that now everything is easier, saying that now he doesn't have to risk his life to get some information, asking what's so funny if the system gives him everything. And the protagonist asked if there was no system when he was in the labyrinth, and so he doesn't know if there was or not. He didn't know what to answer, and the protagonist asked who that guy is, because the time is completely different from the other NPCs he has met so far. So he tells the spirit to shut up, asking if he has a mission or just an object. Then he says that now he wants to treat him with an object, saying that he is a big idiot, and ends up saying that everything is fine, saying that he is someone's ghost who died and is trapped there to give him a mission, but says he can't give a mission to any weakling. So the protagonist asks why he is on the initial floors. So him complaining is how he will know, because that shitty labyrinth put him on that shitty floor, and it was supposed to have put him on the last one. He gets all pissed off, saying that anyway, he should only go back there when he completes the 30th floor, calling the protagonist a piece of shit. And the protagonist gets pissed off that he got that sample, an NPC that isn't even worth wasting his time on. And so, while the protagonist leaves, Casper ends up seeing the sword he has on his belt, so he asks the protagonist to wait, noticing that weapon, asking if it's a La Tirada weapon, asking why. He has one, and so, the spirit goes after him wanting to hunt him, and the protagonist says it's because he completed his test, and Casper is surprised by this, asking if that shitty test was completed by him, saying that he changed his mind and will give him a mission. And the protagonist doesn't like this at all, this approach of the spirit, and he says that he should have told him from the beginning, because clearly he is someone worthy for that test, and says that he will explain the mission to him, calling him. But the protagonist now doesn't want any more mission, and so he says that he said he wanted to, asking him to listen, saying that in the past he was an excellent warrior, and he was the one who reached the deepest floors the fastest, and also the one who completed the labyrinth. And the old face of that warrior is as irritating as his ghost face, and so he says that while trying to conquer the deepest floors, he came across a powerful monster, and went back to the 10th floor to rest. And although his life was low, because low-level monsters couldn't penetrate his defense, and he simply went into deep sleep. But then, the boss of the 10th floor, he doesn't know how, but he had a weapon, and he killed him while he was sleeping, and he, the one who went to the last floor and managed to complete the labyrinth, ended up dying like shit. And he gets very pissed off remembering this, and then says that he has a mission for the protagonist, telling him to kill the boss of the 10th floor, and after that, he gives him a reward. And here is a secondary mission, saying that the warrior who was buried in the labyrinth wants revenge, and the condition is to kill the boss of the 10th floor, and the reward will depend on the warrior's mood. So, the protagonist realizes that if it depends on his mood, he might not give him anything if he's pissed off, because he thinks it's still a mission. So he'll accept, and from the looks of it, that's a chain mission, and so, the hero asks if he'll accept, and the protagonist says yes, saying he's leaving, and then the backrest really touches him, and the protagonist asks if he'll go with him, and he says of course, calling for him to leave, saying he can't stay in his grave, asking how he'll really know if he succeeded, but says that he was actually getting bored of that place. And the protagonist feels like this is going to be a huge headache, and he says that even though it's only up to the 10th floor, it'll be interesting, and with that, he starts to think that he needs to stay with that annoying guy until the 10th floor, and so, the hero asks how that guy would give him an attack weapon, because even though he's off guard at the time, that kind of weapon only appears much later, and doesn't the monster on the 10th floor could already have one, asking if he has any idea how he got there, and he says he doesn't know, asking if he can shut up for a second, and the ghost asks him not to be like that, because he accepted his mission, and now he has to endure it, and the protagonist wonders if he shouldn't have accepted, but thinks that since he's already in this situation, he'll acquire some information, and remembers that he said he was a warrior, asking what he was before in the labyrinth, so he asks why he should answer him, and the protagonist says that's fine, and if he doesn't want to talk, he won't talk. And so, he says that everything is okay, saying that if he wants to know so much, then he'll tell him only. And the protagonist says he doesn't need to talk, telling him to write a coconut, but he says that he came from an imperial family at the Kingdom of Carrot, and he says that he was the firstborn and the only one who could inherit the empire. And he doesn't stop there, saying that he was incredible, an intelligent swordsman, and no one in the empire could compare to him, and all the young girls wanted him, but in doing so, he began to remember his glory days. But the protagonist feels that by the way he talks, he seems like a complete idiot. But then he says that his world ended, and he went there to save everyone, but it turned out that he died while sleeping on a lower floor. And so, he tells you not to get mad at him in anger for his tragic story. And he says that in the end, he failed and didn't save anyone. And this shitty mistake cost him everything. And if it continues like this, he will only be satisfied if he kills the one who killed him. And so, the protagonist notices that that is the last place he will go, and the ghost begins to assume that maybe he is not paying attention to him. And so, he talks about modern-day adventurers getting pissed off. But then, when he is inside the place, there are several goblins there waiting for him. And he starts attacking them at the exact same moment, paralyzing 3 of them, and the last one left is a little lost. But the protagonist goes for him, killing him with the hilt of his sword, and so he receives 10 damage, being stunned, and the others start moving again, but the protagonist finishes them off quite easily, and so the ghost asks what he is doing, because he is shooting paralyzing flashes and just hitting them, asking if he is doing the same old thing, without changing the strategy, and just targeting the same goblins, asking if he has any grudges against them. But the protagonist thinks he's going to do it again, and so the ghost asks if he's trying to gain some skill. Then the protagonist realizes he knows about it, and he says that not knowing enough is sad, but asks him to stop, saying that he won't gain any skill by doing this. However, the protagonist continues doing it, saying that he will gain one, and a very good one, and he remains very focused on it. And a while later, the ghost asks how many floors he thinks he passed, saying it was 85 floors, and knows everything about that place. So, the protagonist asks if he wants to make a bet, because if he doesn't get any skill, he becomes his toy, saying that he will do whatever he asks, and even if it helps to kill himself. But if he wins, he needs to answer all these questions honestly, and the ghost notes that he is very brave because a brat who just entered the labyrinth wants to battle against his knowledge and says that it's okay, and he accepts and puts his name, the great crown prince, Arklet, of the Akarvit's empires on the line, and says that if he wins, he will answer everything. However, if he wins, he will be his slave, and the protagonist says that it's okay, saying that now he can't go back. And at that, Casper starts laughing completely, convinced Bean, telling him to stay out of the court from now on and call him master. And also not to forget the honorific that the protagonist is doing everything he asks, but only in his imagination, and he wonders what else he should do, because it seems like he'll be able to have fun until the day that guy dies. So he tells him not to give up, because there's no point in trying to buy time. And the protagonist asks if he knows the battle skill, then he questions if he shouldn't know, saying that it's a basic skill, and says that when the two accept a duel, no other player can interfere in their fight, and says that's it. And the protagonist says that he can gain something similar there, and so the ghost says that's a lie. However, the protagonist continues doing what he was, and it is said that while facing a large number of enemies, he continuously dueled only one enemy at a time, and acquired the conditional activation skill forced battle. And so, when he gains the skill, the ghost is discredited, and the protagonist remembers that skill he used against Rankus, which is a skill that uses 10 mana. He will battle against a fixed target, and for 10 seconds, he cannot take damage from enemies other than his target. He says that continuous damage, cumulative damage, poison, confusion, and intimidation are all prevented with the skill alone. Then the ghost says that this is meaningless, and depending on how he uses it, even if he gets stuck in lava, or even if he is thrown into space, it is a skill that helps him survive everything. He says that you can win the shit just by doing this. The protagonist says that must be why he didn't have the skill. He says that, to be honest, this is one of the skills with one of the least crazy conditions to fulfill. Then the ghost asks what he did to gain the other skills. He then asks if he remembers the bet, which the ghost is reluctant to accept, and says that maybe we can say he won. He says that there are no restrictions, since he is different from the others. It's true that he's a player type, but in this, he tells him not to forget that skills aren't everything. So he tells him not to think that he'll get something good by doing anything. And the protagonist questions what he's talking about, saying that he just can't lie when answering his questions. Then the ghost gets more and more angry and says that even if the forced battle skill is good, there are several other skills in the labyrinth too, asking if he knows the leap. And the protagonist says yes, but questions Wyatt, asking if he's never heard of the Great Leap. And so the ghost is surprised, and the protagonist immediately realizes that he's never heard of it. And the ghost says that's fine, saying that he knows the skills well, but that's not the only thing that exists in the labyrinth, and they're the things he does to survive and discover a badge are also super important, questioning if he knew, asking what the protagonist is doing. Then he wonders if he's looking for a secret room, and says that it seems like he's going to have a hard time finding it. However, the boy receives a powerful premonition, and then the right brick begins to shine, and when he takes that brick, the ghost is surprised, because the protagonist says he used the detect skill, and when proficiency exceeds 20%, he can occasionally gain important information. and says it's as good as he thought. And so, the ghost is surprised, because he also has to detect. And not to mention that her proficiency is high, and so, he looks up seeing that they are ghost traps, with that bunch of spears on the ceiling, and so, he says that because the traps were placed randomly, it will be difficult to get through them, and he thinks it's better to give up and leave there. However, the protagonist notices that at first, there is an arrow trap, and then a falling trap, and right ahead, there is a trap with crushing walls in front of the chest. And he says that it is the same thing as easy mode, and then, he prepares to use his agility, going after everything, and not letting anything hit him, only with his speed, and he also jumps that part that would make him fall on top of several spears, just doing parkour. And in the last part, the ghost is surprised again, while the protagonist doesn't let himself be crushed, and with that, he punches the wall in front of him, breaking it, and the ghost he opens his eyes wide, not believing the boy's skill. He says that the wall didn't seem to be part of the labyrinth, but was a wall made by goblins, and the durability isn't that high, so it was easy to break. He realizes that it's identical to easy mode, so the ghost thinks he'll stay quiet and won't even speak to give him room. The protagonist asks what the reward is, and he gets a ring imbued with the spring with mana +5. It's a ring that fell in some spring of deep life and has a slight fragrance, so he thinks that that ring with mana came at the right time. At that, the ghost starts asking what the hell the protagonist is. He questions this and asks if he were to speak according to chance, that ghost could understand what he's saying. So he says that if he doesn't understand, it's better to leave it alone, but it seems he doesn't know everything. This means that to win the Ouroboros of Beetle, he needs to pass the floor 85, and he thinks that now that he realized it, he thinks it's been 10 days since he entered there. So he goes to talk to the guys in the chat, and everyone is wondering how they're going to catch a big rat, and they say they just need to train all the time. And another one says that after fighting a few hundred, you can predict their movements, and that's how it becomes easy, and asks John Ryok how he managed to catch something like that so fast. And the boy says it's nothing compared to his. Ryong, who passed in front of him, and Lee Tae-yong starts to assume that guy is abnormal, and the protagonist thinks it's time, and the ghost asks what he's doing, and the protagonist notices that he doesn't know about the community forum, and now he says he has it, and sends them a message, and everyone notices that Tae-yang arrived getting excited, and John Ryok says that he used to open a private room, but that day he went to the public asking if something happened, and the protagonist says it's time to start explaining things slowly, but asks how things are going, and John Ryok says he almost didn't make it, and about the people who reached the spring of life. About half managed to hunt a big rat, so he asks about the two of them, and he says he ran away after facing that gigantic rat, and after taking a hit from him, he lucked out. Then Lee Tae-yong says that the same thing happened to her, because she clearly can't beat him with her current strength, so she's going after beating him, using another way, and she'll have to give it her all, but at least it will be easier. And the protagonist says that now they are planning things, then he's happy, saying that the reason he came to that day is to talk to the solo mode players about the skills. But then John Ryok asks why he's only talking now, and the protagonist says that now is the best time, and the skills are, in the end, not an end goal, but something that helps them complete the labyrinth faster, and if he talked about them before, they would be putting the cart before the horse. Then Lee Tae-yong says that when he entered the labyrinth, even if he had talked about them, she would have no idea how to apply it in practice, and he says that anyway. He'll just explain it to everyone, asking them to listen, and explain it to the others who didn't come there. They're all happy to know important things like that. Then he thanks the protagonist a lot, saying that he won't forget what he did for them. Then he tells them to thank him after listening to what he's going to say, and says that first, the easiest skill to get, and he'll teach reduce pain, and everyone is happy. So he tells them grab a weapon and pierce their arms. And everyone starts to think he's a little crazy, and he asks if they don't have a sword, saying that if they do, they should pierce it right over the bones, because it will only work if they hit the bone directly, and tells them not to give up on that skill just because they're scared. And everyone is scared to death, asking if he's telling them to self-harm, and the protagonist says yes, because after all, they have the spring of life to heal themselves, asking what the problem is, and everyone stays quiet, and he says that if they fight a big rat, they will be able to gain a skill called unbreakable willpower, which will let them fight without stopping, regardless of the injuries they receive. So they shouldn't forget to fight them, and he asks if they are serious about trying to kill themselves, and they ask them if there is any skill that doesn't require killing themselves to learn, and the protagonist says there is more, telling them to pay attention, saying that the next skill is to sharpen a thread, and you can get this skill if they throw themselves into the lake of the spring of life and hold their breath until they almost die. And if they keep striking with their sword to the limit while using this skill, they will get the attack by a thread, and everyone becomes even more afraid again. And he says that the next one is to resist, and it will allow them to not take damage from an attack that can kill them, and they only need 1 dexterity, and receiving 30 attacks from a big rat is a good skill, and everyone is getting wilted or listening to him talk, asking if they really need to do these crazy things to be able to gain the skills, saying that they can't do it, asking how he can tell them to do these crazy things, and says that no matter how much he wants a skill, he thinks there's no way to come up with an idea. And so he says he really does think so, saying he won't do it. But the protagonist makes it clear that he's not forcing anyone to do it, and he has no reason to. So they decide whether to do it or not, and says that it's plausible for them to think about it because these people are used to the modern era, and for them war is only part of history books, and hunger is a problem of distant countries. So they are people who have never needed to risk their lives to save an entire country, and so entering the labyrinth wouldn't change their ideals of survival. And Lee Taeyong asks if there isn't another way, and the protagonist says unfortunately not, and those who follow him faithfully say that then they have no choice and they have to try. And Lee Taeyong says he never thought he would do something of this level in his life, but at this, everyone is surprised. They are crazy, wondering if they will really do this, questioning if they realize that the protagonist might be lying to them. But Lee Taeyong questions why Tae-sam would do something like that, and not why someone like him would lie to them, because until now he was talking about everything as his strategies, and they all work, and everyone there is embarrassed by what he just said, and they say that they will start with the easiest one, that it would be by a thread, asking if it is not that dangerous, and the protagonist says that it will not be a problem, and if he has some easy way to get out underwater, as soon as the system gives the alert, everything will be fine. But he says that it will not be easy to suppress his instincts, so it will be very difficult to do this, and they are left wondering if they will really do it, and the protagonist tells them to do their best, because later he will come back to teach them how to get other abilities, and everyone says goodbye to him. And the ghost appears again to the protagonist, because he was wondering what he was going to do it, but it seems like he was going to waste his time, saying that no matter how much he talks or warns, the labyrinth is a place where people will die at some point or another, and no matter what he tries to do. But the protagonist says that even so, some of them might manage to survive, and the ghost gets angry, because if he's already finished, they should leave soon, because he's starting to get pissed since they're so close to the end. And so they arrive at the boss room and says that it's time to beat the boss, and the protagonist wonders if he's already the end of the second floor, and the ghost says yes, but asks if he doesn't want to know what the second floor boss is like, asking if he won't use the bet they made before. But the protagonist says there's no need, because he has other things to ask him, and now he's going to start the battle. And so the goblin wizard appears along with the guardian goblin, and so he already starts using that staff with the bizarre eyes and mouths to be able to cast his magic. And the guardian goblin also goes after the protagonist, attacking, and he defends himself with a shield, and the ghost asks him to calm down, saying that he shouldn't do that. But then the protagonist hits him with his shield back, and the ghost wonders if he's behind him. And then the wizard starts to prepare his magic, and the ghost says that apparently he knows about this ability of his, but doesn't know the strategy they're using, telling him to get that cuckold there first, questioning if he can't see that he's the stranger there. But the protagonist tells him to relax, because he knows what he was doing, and also, in his opinion, this is the best way. And the wizard starts to cast his magic at the protagonist, surrounding him completely, but the boy doesn't seem to be hit. And it turns out that when he opens his eyes after pretending, he has another place full of death and corpses over there, and those corpses say that all of this happened because they harvested the easy way, and everyone died because of him, questioning how he dare be the only survivor, saying that it's all his fault. And apparently, these are the people from his old world, and they say that it's the protagonist's fault, questioning why he was born, saying that everything is his fault, and trying to get into the protagonist's mind, saying that he's just a piece of shit. And even Litaean appears there, asking why he didn't go there, and questions why he let him die alone, crying and extending his hand to the boy. While that tsunami of dead goes over him, he ends up being lifted to the bottom, and while he's being grabbed, he tells everyone that it was bad, but that won't work on him, asking the wizard to stop that shit. And from outside, the ghost sees him being caught in that magic, saying he thought it would work this time, questioning why they never cut it. And the wizard continues to set the protagonist up, while the ghost wonders if his revenge failed this time. But when he attacks the protagonist now, he ends up opening his eyes and says he told him to stop with that shit, cutting off all the attacks, and he activates the unbreakable willpower. And the ghost is surprised, asking if he succeeded, and the wizard is also scared to death with the boy going after him, and tries to attack him again using madness. But it is said that he was not affected thanks to the unbreakable willpower. And the protagonist says again that he already said that it will not work on him, and the wizard is scared to death, and so he activates the curse. But the protagonist is also not affected by it. Unfortunately for him, his soul abilities have never failed before, and so it is said that he suffers no penalty, and the wizard ends up falling backwards on the ground, with the protagonist grabbing him by the collar and raising that thing. And it is said that he experienced mental magic several times, and acquired the ability with the conditional activation Dino, resistant spirit, and resistant to magic. Then he raises his dagger pointing at the wizard, saying that he already got what he wanted, then spoke, killing him in cold blood, and the ghost notices that he withstood the mind control using only his standard spiritual resistance, and not even he could do that. And when the protagonist finally kills him, he begins to evolve more and more, and the ghost thinks to himself that he was thinking of giving him the enemy's information so he can move as he wanted. But it seems that he is a psychopath, one beyond what he imagined, questioning himself who that guy is. And my friend, this guy there is the protagonist of this music that I'm loving. The guy is simply absurd. He's not becoming B10 from one moment to the next, but he's being totally cold and calculating. And so the protagonist gets a low-grade mana boosting potion, and he will permanently increase his mana by 10. And he also gets the precarious thieves tool that helps him escape traps. Then he says that who would have thought that little beauty would appear in a secret room like that. Unfortunately, that's it. He will get a skill related to traps soon. And then the ghost says that he really went through every corner of the second floor. He questions him then, asking why he is angry about that. And the ghost says that he is an undead, asking if he really thinks he will be happy seeing someone doing well like him. But seeing that complaining won't help, he asks the protagonist to let it go. And so the third floor mission is started, and he can advance to the next floor if he defeats the third floor boss. So he is happy that he finally got there, and the reward is a low-grade stamina increasing potion. The secret reward is not spoken. Then the king notices that he returned, but at that moment the ghost starts to annoy the king, noticing that he is still alive, and he says that he accepted the mission of that pest, getting angry and tells Taishan that he is just a loser, telling him not to be influenced by that ghost. And the little ghost says that man is too old to be lying, saying that this is ugly, and says that the old man giving advice to someone makes him question if that guy is valuable to him. And the two start to fight, and the protagonist tries to get their attention, while the ghost asks if he should hit that old man because he wants to see that old man go crazy. And the old man asks if he thinks a shit how is he going to even touch the protagonist. And he says he's already dead, asking what he thinks what he can do, asking him to talk. And the two continue arguing, and the protagonist gets fed up, throwing that bunch of weapons at the old man, telling them to stop fighting and pay attention because he's going to sell all that, asking the king to show him something useful. And the king is surprised that he got that much, asking how many monsters he killed. And so the protagonist manages to buy metal-infused gloves that give to more attack, as well as a bronze shield that gives 1 more attack and 5 more defense, and he likes that. And he also has a metal ring and piercings that give 3 more attack in total, as well as the powerful pendant that gives to more attack. And he says that finally, he sold good items, and says that now he will be able to kill a goblin with just 2 hits. Then the ghost starts cursing the protagonist, asking if he's hacking, and the king says it's the air hack weapon arts. And the two continue pissed, while the protagonist asks if it's possible to stop that little fight, saying he's leaving. And so he asks why the two hate each other, and the ghost questions if it's possible to like a grumpy old man like that, and he tells the protagonist to be careful, because that bastard will only try to verify himself, and says that what he means is that he can change at any moment, then tells him not to believe him, because he's just a shitty slave, and he's an enemy to people like him or the protagonist, telling him to never forget that. Then he questions if he's saying this from personal experience, and thinks he'll keep that in mind, but ends up bumping into something that scares him, a very grotesque shadow, but it turns out to be just a few goblins on top of each other. And seeing that, he manages to kill one of them very easily, attacking another, and the other one that's left runs away crying. And the protagonist notices that it hasn't even been 10 minutes, that the protagonist is already able to leave that floor tedious, and he continues destroying everything that lives in front of him. And the ghost says that in the past that place was much more difficult, and there were always some goblin wizards in that little group, and he almost died several times. But the protagonist completes everything in 2 to 3 minutes, and so the ghost tells him to stop using the hack. But the protagonist says that for him, the 3rd floor is easier than the 2nd. But the ghost says that at this pace, he asks if he doesn't think it's necessary to keep hitting one enemy at a time, because at his level, he doesn't think it will increase his XP, and also why he doesn't go to the next floor quickly. But the protagonist even says that he's right, but he has a mission. So the ghost questions him about it, asking if there's any other mission he accepted, and he says it's one from Lakiritas. The mission says to finish off all the monsters on the 2nd and 3rd floors, and he does that and gets rid of them all, and continues observing the mission. And then the ghost notices that he gave him an extra mission, saying that he managed to complete his test. But it's the first time he's heard of something like that, and the protagonist says yes. And by the way, he has something to ask about Lycuridas, questioning how much he knows about the apostle contract. And then the ghost turns his face, saying that he doesn't believe he knows that too, because it seems like that bastard offered him one, and questions what to explain first. And the protagonist asks if he's thinking about what to say. And he says that he knows he's dead, but he has a limit to what he can say, but not to what he can know, and questions how he should explain it to him from the beginning, saying that the gods are responsible for their zones, and the god of victory and the god of defeat are examples of this. However, there are also other gods who take care of two or more zones, like Lycuridas, who is the god of conflict and death. And there are also gods that come into this, the conceptual ones, the ones of faith, and several others. And the protagonist asks what kind of existence the gods are, because they are a little different from the gods of the earth, and he says that they were the ones who helped design the labyrinth, and the protagonist is interested in what he says. And the ghost asks if he remembers the status window that appears when he enters there, and says that a long time ago this place was a labyrinth created by extraordinary wizards, and there were rumors that they would grant the wish of whoever completed the labyrinth. And he says that it is difficult for the wizard to create a labyrinth alone. So he met the ancient beings and told them of his plans, and so what he wanted was to make a large labyrinth, which would be a tower that led to the deepest. And he asked if they would like many and countless heroes who would try to conquer that place and see the challenges of those who risk their lives, and also the vain deaths of those who deserve to die. And the protagonist notes that what it seems, the gods, they liked the idea of that place, but he questions if they just liked it because they loved the idea and gave full support to this wizard, and so they built the labyrinth, and the labyrinth that the gods meticulously created was ready. And the deepest place there is the place of the foundation, and whoever enters the labyrinth will go through countless tests to prove their worth, and they will offer contracts with the people they like the most. And these contracts are the apostle contracts. But the protagonist asks if this is a good thing or a bad thing. And then the ghost says that if someone sees the apostle of a god, that person will gain many abilities because they are very loved by the god, and will also receive a lot of help, and will receive better rewards than a normal person would receive. But then the protagonist asks what the bad part is. And so the ghost says that his spirit will be of the god, and also the other gods will not like him. And there are several gods there in the labyrinth, and they all have different desires and ideals, especially Lycuridas, who is a god who has many enemies, and also several gods who hate him because he likes to humiliate others. And he says he's sure things will get worse and worse the further he advances in the apostle, and says it's true because he'll have divine revelations in exchange for having received the powers that the god gave him. And it doesn't matter, even if he doesn't want it and it doesn't make sense. He can't refuse. And the protagonist thinks there's a lot of bad in this, and says he thinks he'll have to put aside his plan of accepting an apostle contract. He also remembers that the ghost said that those who conquer the labyrinth will be able to fulfill a wish, and he notes that conquering means completing all the missions, and he never heard Lee talk about it. Then he wonders if that item was her wish, but then he thinks that the Lee he knows would have made another wish instead of going back in time. But he thinks that there are a lot of strange things from the beginning, and says that after combining the ghost stories with what he knows, it seems that the adventurers spontaneously chose to conquer the labyrinth to fulfill their wish. But he questions about the people of the land. Then he says that there is still a lot he doesn't know, but he just calls the ghost to be able to advance, and he says that's fine. And in that case, he asks if they are going to catch all the monsters right before advancing to the next floor. And the protagonist thinks that all he can do now is focus on the things that are within his reach. And with that, Tessa continues exploring until he manages to successfully remove a trap. Using that key, he is surprised and ends up acquiring a special activation ability, Trap Remover. And the mana consumption is 1, and his proficiency is at 1%. He can remove traps. And it's not so good, but it's not so bad either. And the ghost is getting angry with the protagonist, and he says he thought he would have to use it more than 100 times. But it seems that using it only 10 times already worked, and it was much easier than expected. So he activates Trap Remover again and starts checking some things.